with
yeah, Dennis is taking over, but I mean, I'm not sure why he's not here, but he's proposing before he goes into relation. Next week would be like an interlude, mathematical interlude.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we will have a very impressive upgrade in our imagery, because he's bringing in much more legible figures and graphs and so on. So it should be good.
Awesome.
Let me just share my screen with you guys. Yeah, as I was saying before you came in, my idea today is to divide the discussion in 3 parts. The first part is just for us to go over, in a more narrative sense, kind of just speculative or more conceptual sense, not such a technical sense, some of the stuff we already seen, which I think kind of covers all the way to point. We officially covered everything to point 3.4, but we unofficially already covered everything to point 3.9. My idea is to go over those things in just kind of a general discussion of them, also to kind of situate people who are here who weren't here before. I have this crazy image that we might use. Perhaps it can be helpful. Let me just see if I can open it. I did this thing here. To cover all the steps in the chapter.
What's Charles Ives doing there in your screen?
Yeah, my idea was actually to use Charles Ives today as an example. If we get to it.
Yeah, I've been in a very, very, very hard Charles Ives phase now.
Yeah, I saw you commenting on Ives. I felt like a warmth in my heart, and I thought.
So this is appropriate.
And it's also appropriate because it's the most Lynch-like. Like there's almost the whole of Angelo Badalamenti in like the first.
Yeah, it's kind of. I think you're right. It's the most Lynch-like musician in a sense, because there are those are very identifiable different structures going on simultaneously or clashing. So there's this idea of a clash between different things, right?
Yeah. So this thing here that I have, besides the Charles Ives thing, my computer might be a bit slow. Okay. This is here basically the structure of the chapter. So basically all the stuff that we saw kind of organized on what depends on what, like what you need to understand what. And I try to separate it a bit kind of in 4 kind of approaches, right? I call the general approach everything that goes through from all the way to the definition of a real atom, which is a sort of general analytic of the problem. I will go back to it in a second, but just to give an overview, right? A sort of general analytic of what it means to be an object in a world, to be something indecomposable in a world, things like this. Then there is a local analysis, which is what the beginning of the atomic logic, which is actually, let's say, the idea of how you generate atoms from other atoms, what it means for atoms to be compatible, what does this entail in terms of order, how are certain definitions equivalent at this level, so localization and ordering and things about how they connect. Then we get to a certain regional idea. So we start going back up to a syntactic perspective. We reintroduce the idea of enveloping and let's say evaluating regions based on atoms. And then we get to the transcendental functor, which is again a global analysis, right? So I added global to differentiate from general, because the general is still, let's say, we're departing from this function of appearing, which is a very general thing. It's let's say, it covers the world in this kind of, for us, amorphous way. We don't know much about its structure, except from the things we can directly deduce from the post-set structure, the Heyting algebra, and things like this. But at this point here, when we arrive at transcendental functor and we have the atomic logic, what we actually reconstruct is from the bottom up, right? So my idea, not sure if we can actually go through each of these steps, but these are all the steps that I kind of separated from the transcendental functor chapter, where what depends on what's to be proved and what you should understand to be able to understand another part. So this is, my idea is for us to discuss very briefly and very generally what all of this means, all the way to here, to the regional part, and then to go into a bit more detail of what the move from the regional to the global entails, what's at stake here. And then to try to give a more, let's say, intuitive, speculative discussion based on this, so that we can start kind of approximating what the hell is at stake, right? I created this thing here. I tried to share it in our chat there, but so other people could add stuff, but for some reason it's not working very well. But we shouldn't be following it through that slide. I think it's a bit too confusing. So yeah. So I'm still having hard time kind of, I had a test run last week. Caron helped me a lot with it, like trying to find a way to talk about logics of worlds in a way that I think is kind of more, takes benefit from a more intuitive understanding of these things, and then complicates and details it, rather than just go through Badiou's own presentation. And I think that I'm convinced now that the way that we discussed this in the beginning, right, the way that we explored the relation between power sets and the idea that there is a generalization of the notion of power set in the idea of this post-set structure that with some added structure is a Heyting algebra, that this is actually, let's say, a better starting point than the one that we get from the book itself. So what we saw thus far is that, going back very quickly, Badiou defines a world as a set, a multiple that contains, actually, it doesn't contain a set. We later on saw that he actually defines it as a subset. A subset endowed with an order structure, right? T is called the transcendental of that world. So he then gives us some properties of this structure. We don't need to go through them again, but basically he then concludes, well, this structure, which is basically a partial order structure with some added stuff, it means that there is a minimum element. It means that given 2 degrees, 2 points in this structure, you can talk about the conjunction of these elements. Given some degrees or some points in this structure, you can talk about the envelope or the union, let's say, of these points. You can talk about distributivity. And with these properties, he says, well, you can start talking about a world. So a multiple plus an order that has this structure is a world. So why is this? How can we translate this into a more intuitive kind of understanding? The way that I started thinking about it is because I always thought that being an event was a bit clearer on this point. because in being an event, I mean, I'm going to rehash the thing I say every time, but in being an event, you have this idea that, well, if you have a certain set with whatever it is that you have inside of it, you already have the power set of this set, which will contain all the ways you can combine things here. So it will contain this, it will contain this, it will contain just B, and it will contain empty set. So we can imagine, let's say, a certain function here that asks questions of a set. So for anything we ask of this original set here, it can only give us one of these 4 subsets as an answer. Whatever it is that you choose. If I have 2 letters here, you can ask, I don't know, stuff that has only one element. So either I'll get a set that has A and a set that has B. I can ask stuff that has Greek letters, both. Then I will get this subset here. Stuff that has only Japanese ideograms. I'll get the null set as an answer. So I can choose any formula or any predicate here, and what it can give me, what it can be, let's say, the referent of that formula can only be one of these 4 things here. So the first thing to note is that on the one hand, we have here ways of selecting things, right? And the power set is giving us something like the space of possible selections, right? And we can know something about the size of the space based on the size of the situation. A situation that has 2 elements, the space of possible selections will have the two options, right? So there is something ontological about the reference of any possible statement based on the simple fact of how much stuff there is in a situation. And second, there is some ordering as well. We know that if I have this subset, it contains this, and then I have this. I can order it like this hashed diagram here, right? This basic structure here, this basic ordering is, let's say, something you get as a freebie in the same way that we got this space here of possible selections from this set. So in a certain sense, if you have a set, no matter, without defining which predicates you're going to use to extract something out of it, you know you can only extract something that has these options here, and that these options will have some sort of inner ordering, right? Now, all of this is, let's say, restrained in one way that is kind of built in the very structure, which is the sort of answer to questions. So the sort of possible selections that I can have, it only accepts, let's say, 0 or 100% belonging, right? I only get something that doesn't belong, 0% belonging, or 100%. So if when I ask a question, Greek letters, either something doesn't belong, let's say I have here like a square, right? It doesn't belong. Or it does belong, like for example, alpha and beta. But for example, in reality, we don't get only yes or no. There are situations where, for example, a smart ass might say, yeah, you think this looks like a Greek letter, but it doesn't really. Like it looks only 70% like a Greek letter. So it's actually 70% of alpha. And beta, no, beta looks like a Greek letter 100%. So it's not really, this is not fully an answer. It's kind of partially an answer. So it's kind of a fuzzy, like rather than having a subset, which absolutely has these 2 things inside, I have like a fuzzy one where kind of A is inside, but not really, and beta is really inside, right? So when we move our kind of frame, our grammar, from this classical yes or no way of classifying things to a way of classifying stuff that accepts, let's say, continuous differentiation, right? Like something can be a lot inside or not that much inside. It can be very much like B or just a bit like B. We get a situation where we have a multiple. We have this different way of classifying things, which now accepts more values. So between 0 and 1, I can have like 0.8%, like another quotient or some of belonging, let's say, right? Creating a space where I still can order it. Just like when in my original example with the power set, I still could think that if I have alpha and beta, I have some structure because I can only have these subsets and they have this organization. So this was either it's not or it's in, right? In this case here, where I can have a different way of grading my answers to the questions that I might ask, I still get some structure, but it might be much more complicated than this one, right? Because, for example, I have situations where I have sets like, again, I'm being very intuitive about this. I have sets which are like 0.8 of alpha and 0.7 of beta. And I have another one which is 0 of alpha and 1 of beta. So you have many ways, actually infinite ways of adding this sort of open, fuzzy subsets into this space, right? Which means that the structure of how they relate, I can still say, for example, a subset that has 0.8 of alpha and 0.7 of beta, surely it has more of them than one that has 0.1 of alpha and 0.1 of beta. I can still say that this is bigger than this. So there is some ordering, but this ordering kind of explodes in the level of detail in comparison with this classical space below. And all that we changed was this thing here. We don't say that the way that we can extract, the way that we can refer to things might only separate absolutely something or not. It might separate things in this continuous way, right? And suddenly we still have an idea of order, but it's more sophisticated and we don't know exactly what it is, right? In comparison with this. So in this case, we still have that idea of order that we had before, and we still have a sense in which something was mapped to something else, like a function. So what does Badiou do? He says, he doesn't do like, this is not the way that he conceives of the function that interests him, but he will say, he will take from philosophical intuition the idea that to appear in a world, to be here is just to belong to this multiple. But to appear in this world is to be inscribed is to give some value to the question, how different or how similar you are to something else. So he comes up with this function, we call the identity function, that evaluates the proximity, the similarity or the difference between these two things. And it gives you a value of their proximity. Right? So he does two things. So the first is that he defines this. This is not deducible. This is something that he came up with. On the one hand, it is interested in a relation. Unlike here, where the subsets are the answer to something that might be something like just selecting things that have this property, right? This is general predication or representation. Here, there is a specific relation he's interested in, and it gives you a value. So alpha and beta are identical to the p degree. Now, this is so general, and he doesn't even define this in this way. Like, this is so general that we know that this can be related to, let's say, if I have a gamma here, and I now compare alpha to gamma, and it gives me a q degree. I know that either p is smaller than q, or q is smaller than p, or they are not comparable, right? They're not comparable. But I know I have only these three options. And if I know I have only these three options, and I know that some other operations are valid, I can kind of deduce the general structure of this thing here, the basic traits of this structure, right? Which is what is called a complete Heyting algebra. So for Badiou, a complete Heyting algebra is what you know about a space that will contain the relation between degrees of appearance, if this relation here is the way that you ask questions about it, right? So to be very, very, very synthetic about the whole thing, he will say, let me just open some space here. He will say that, well, we have now a way of asking about relations between elements in a world, and the answer to these relations is not specific subsets, extensively absolute, that are separated, but intensities, right? Because the answer, actually, let's say the most intuitive way of thinking about the answers is like more or less than something, more than something else. You don't know you don't know what you're measuring necessarily. You don't know how you're measuring. You don't know the general view of this, but you do know some stuff. Because if this is valid, and if some other operators are valid, you will know, for example, that there is something like a minimum, something which is less than anything else you compare. You will know there is a maximum, something that is more than anything else that you compare with it. You will know how to conjoin things that are comparable. You will know how to make unions of things. So you will know some stuff that structure this space, even if you don't know its general structure. So I think that this is a good way to introduce it, just because at the level of the chapter on transcendental, when he says a world is a multiple plus an order structure, right? From here we get that thing, like the elements that belong to a certain situation, and from here we get this stuff which maps, that has, let's say, the way that all the answers to questions of how different all the answers to these questions are here, and we know something about the structure of this thing here, right? So in a certain way, we can say that this is, let's say, very broadly speaking, the law of differences that make a difference. Surely this is different from this because there are multiples, and in set theory extensionally they're already distinct. But the question that the transcendental does is that it tells you the structure of how these differences are different, right? How are extensional differences different in this world? So for example, it's possible that in this world, A and B are maximally equivalent, like identical, and B and gamma are very different, like mu. Meaning that this difference is more different than this difference, right? So the space of the structure of how differences make a difference, that's what the transcendental organizes, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you know what is there. Like, I think this is the important part. Like the chapter on the transcendental and the whole beginning on the chapter on the object, it's all about what we can say about this structure without knowing anything about what's going on inside of it, right? We know that if we have a multiple and we have some order structure on it, that some stuff holds. Well, it holds that if I evaluate first the relation between alpha and beta, and it says that it's minimal or very low in identity, it's very different, in other words. And then I evaluate the relation between alpha and gamma, and it's more similar than the first. I know that this will appear more similar than that. So this is more similar than that thing. So I already have some more than structure, and I can start talking about, okay, two things that are more than something else. What are the relation between them? And some other information can be derived in this way. I'll just skip this whole thing with the measure. I use this simple example here at first. I think I kind of already went over it one way or another now. So this is what we saw in the beginning of our discussion. A definition based on this principle, and just use the image here. Where is it? Fuck, why did I draw all those stuff? It was already much clearer done in the slides. Where is the little, I think I erased it. Such a pretty little. Okay, so Badiou starts then to talk about this function that he defines, right? This little drawing here represents very well what I was artistically drawing previously. How does the function of appearing relate these two multiples that belong to the world in terms of a certain degree? Then he gives us some examples of what it means to look at stuff in this way. For example, he says, imagine that you are like in a demonstration, like a protest in France. Of course, all these things here, they are ontologically distinct, but you can ask questions of them that concern how they appear in this world, right? So demonstration in the making is a multiple, and it's also a transcendental, meaning regime or a space of how differences make a difference in this world, right? So for example, in this world, a red flag that is extensionally different from another, they might be very similar, right? So the value that they give is very high of similarity. Whereas communists and anarchists might be distinct. So they might look like a very low similarity, like perhaps minimum. So this is basically how you could apply this here. The thing is that, okay, this looks like almost like an inquiry that you make, and that it can give you an answer separately every time. But what you start to realize is that, well, these inquiries are constrained one by the other. And they start having, you start realizing that, well, if I compare two red flags and they're very similar, like here, and I compare a black flag and it's less similar to the red flag, I already know that if I compare the second red flag to the first black flag, they will be also less than maximally equal, right? So there's some inner rules that you can already start to extract information of this world based on this, right? So this is what he calls triangular inequality. If I compare this red flag to the other and it gives me a maximal, and if I compare the red flag to the black flag and it gives me a lower degree, well, when I compare the red flag with the black, the value of this comparison will be constrained, right? So we start to get a certain dissemination of how this relation start to constrain the space of difference, right? If some things are more different, then at a given inquiry. For the next inquiry, that will also affect how things are related or relatable. So he says about this symmetry and symmetry, meaning that if you compare the black flag with the red flag, it's the same thing as comparing the red with the black. So doesn't matter. The question how different or how similar is not a question where the order of what is the similar to what matters. And then we saw, okay, this is the crazy discussion that we had. So at this point, we start giving some, like with this very basic machinery that didn't say much, right? All it said this far is, if you have a multiple with an order structure, you can talk about the space of how differences make a difference in that world. If you can talk about the space where differences make a difference in that world, you can start talking about some rules of differentiation, right? So we would say, like, at first we have a definition of world, which concerns like a multiple plus a t. Then we got to the function of appearing. And here at this point is just, right, it talks about, let's say the definition of the law of difference. Then at the level of appearance, or the definition of appearance, which is that function that gives us some value, we start seeing that we know something about how differences differentiate. We know that there are constraints, there are things that follow from this structure once you start asking specific questions. How is this different from that, right? So the first constraints on differences start to appear. And then we get a new step now when we get to the definition of phenomena, which is when you get this function here, which compares any two things and gives you a degree, and you say, let me fix this one. This is fixed. And let me ask the comparison of the difference or similarity of this thing to anything else that I can have here. So alpha with x1, alpha with x2, alpha with x3, and so on and so forth, right? A phenomena, which is, he calls it this phi function, fixates our questions of difference, right? It kind of adds a new constraint in appearance to the constraint that we are always evaluating one element in particular, right? So ID, so actually he doesn't call it ID, right? He calls it this phi function that evaluates A in a certain multiple. So it now fixates our evaluation. So it's the differences that make a specific difference, right? One difference. We also saw this, right? And there is a technical discussion on exactly how is this constraint going on here formally, and some problems with the notation that we found. But anyway, just 1 second. And then we get to the first kind of big problem. I mean, there is one extra thing we can do, which is also important, which is, so we defined worlds in this idea of a law of difference. We defined what to appear means. Oh my God, appearance. Insofar as to appear is to be constrained by something of this law, right? So some constraints on differentiation. You cannot be different in any way in a world, right? So if, let's say there is a red flag and a black flag, two red flags and a black flag in this world. If they are very much alike, and both of them are different from this one, if now some other flag appears, it will have to relate to these degrees, and it's constrained by them. So it might be, if it is more similar to the anarchist flag, right? So if in this case here, it's similar to this one, then we know that it will be different from this one. So to appear is to enter into this fabric of differences and to abide to some constraints that they impose. He defined these constraints as that symmetry constraint and the triangular one. But you see, we still don't know very much. All we know is that to appear carries over certain restrictions, right? We don't know much about that law or anything. And then with the phenomena, we are now asking about, okay, how do all these differences differentiate a particular element, right? So it's, as I said, it's like differences based on a particular one difference. And then Badiou does something which is, I think it's actually quite profound, but it's hard to think about it, which is, well, if a phenomena is just how we fixate an element here and compare it to anything else, we can also compare it to itself and see how much does something relate to itself in a world. How much is it, let's say, identical to its own difference, right? And the answer for him is that this can also get any value. This doesn't need to be always maximal, in the sense that I am always identical to myself. I can always also be like minimal to myself. I can be totally self-different. And for him, this measure of intensity of your difference to yourself defines how much you exist in a world. So there is probably a nice way to translate this idea into the terms that I'm using here as well, but I can't really think of it. I will never be able to carry this. Yeah. But so almost like a case of the phenomena, its existence defined as this self-difference, right? Measure of self-difference. Now, at this point, we are at the limit in the sense that we understood that there is some sort of, you don't even need to draw it here, like we have some sort of structure which organizes the laws of differentiation in this space. We don't know what that law is. All we know that whatever law it is, it has certain structure, certain form. We know that we can define a lot of concepts based on that very simple or basic structure. We can define what appearance will be in this context. We can define what a phenomena is, and we can define what existence is. So we kind of understand a sort of extrinsic relationality in this space. Like given some element, I know it's constrained by this differentiation to appear more or less different from other things, more or less different from itself, so on and so forth. But we can also ask, and I think this is where the thing gets really, really important. Sorry, just some comment. We can also, and I think that this is a question that is even hard to pose in terms of this sort of Batesonian kind of a difference that makes a different sort of approach, which is the question of decomposition, right? Up to this point, we're mostly asking questions about how does a certain phenomena in this world relate to other stuff, like so what is the degree of similarity between this and that? But I think that at this point here, which is he calls the phenomenal component and the atom of appearing, we start getting questions of the sort, why what counts as, let's say, a whole and a part in this situation? What counts? I mean, I know that I can compare these things and get a degree, and I know that I can constrain this, and I can constrain this in certain ways to get, let's say, the differentiation of certain regions and to focus on what is recognizable or what is proper of a certain region of this world. But we get to a sort of ontology of difference now when we ask the question, okay, but what counts in this world and what doesn't? Like, what is the point at which stuff doesn't necessarily count? And I think that it took us a long time to kind of see that he takes a step, because this question is not a continuation of the previous question, right? If we go to our little crazy diagram and just see if I can open it. If we go here, you see that this is the function of appearing that we were talking about. This is the definition of phenomena, which is just this sort of set of all evaluations that have A as the fixed element, right? But the phenomenal component is kind of a separate thing. It's not just a derivation. It's not a continuation of this sort of inquiry. It's kind of a parallel inquiry. Like this part here, we're talking about, we're moving from the transcendental to the idea, to the phi function. We're kind of asking about how differences differentiate. But the component, it begins by introducing this idea of of predication, right? So imagine that you have, I mean, very intuitively, you have this space where according to the degrees of T in M, you get some stuff being more similar to others, like alpha is very similar to beta. It seems like gamma is actually very distinct from it. And this other region here, it's kind of close to it. And this other region is close to gamma, but very separate from this one here. This is like a differential space. All that counts here is that this is absolutely different from this, but more like this thing, which is kind of like this, which is more like this thing here, right? But we're just, let's say, coming up with a sort of differential terrain. But we can still now ask questions about, kind of go back to the sort of approach that I mentioned in the beginning, and we can imagine that I have a certain predicate, and I want to know, when I look into this world, how does this predicate select things in this space? So we spend a long time talking about paintings and talking about how different predicates can separate chunks of a painting, right?
Hi, Gabriel.
Hey, my friend.
Hi. Just wanted to throw an idea, see what you guys think. I think you're absolutely right in saying that there is a different flow when it reaches phenomenal component. But I think one way to think about it is, again, what is happening behind the scene is, so far we introduced, like you mentioned, that a word is a multiple, and there is one rudimentary, elementary way of being able to recognize elements of these multiples and measure their differences, and also measure an element of this world with other elements. But I think the question that with phenomenal component he's asking is the question of how do we construct count as one? How do we recognize something is one?
Yes.
In a much more complex way, rather than the elementary. Well, at the end of the day, he relates through the postulate of materialism what is possible to count as one through atoms of appearing to the ontological elements or multiples. But I think the way that he's doing this from both ways, like you said, from local atom, from regional object, and then from global perspective, is a much more sophisticated way of being able to count things as one.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly what we were getting to here with this idea that what does it mean for something to be, let's say, to obtain for a particular predicate, right? If I ask a question about this space here and I want an answer to, does X fall under this predicate? This is, let's say, the first step to define components. And components are, let's say, parts, but we don't know yet if they are minimal parts, right? So I think this is already something that, I totally agree with the importance of what you're asking, but I think that it's in the, let's say, at the point where we are in the narrative that I'm proposing, I think it's important to distinguish between the way that he comes up to talk about what a part is, or what is a component, right? From how this analytic of components will get you to something to be called an atom, like a minimal one, right?
Yeah, and if I can add something, I think we want to remember that the phenomenal component is pre-count as one. It's like the build up to it, right?
Yeah,
the atom
exactly.
is when it gets unified. Because a phenomenal component can be like a bunch of random predicates that like don't have any unified structure in the world.
And the reason why I'm saying this is because, I mean, we always downplay the fact that from the standpoint of this thing here, for example, let's go back to our crappy flag example, right? At this general level of inquiry, if I'm comparing the flag, like the inside of a flag, to the inside of the other flag, if I'm comparing the pole to the rest of the flag, if I'm comparing the pole of this flag with this other flag, like this regime of difference is kind of unbounded. Like we get coherent answers to all these questions, but there is no sense yet of, let's say, where we're at. And I think that this is very important because in some sense, as you said, Reza, we don't know what counts as one in this space. We know we have a general language to talk about differences and differentiation, but we don't have enough resources to talk about how things cohere as, let's say, how to almost reconstruct the idea of belonging inside of this space of differentiation, right? We don't know yet how to say, sure, I know that these things are very different, those are less different, that I can compare this thing to this thing, but I can also compare this part of it to this part. Like it's unbounded. We don't have any structure to talk about this yet. So we want to know, how are these differences differentiating parts and wholes, right? How is it that we can, let's say, not really count as one in the classical sense, but almost like differentiate the one? And I think that that's why this is important to present in a slightly kind of first to distinguish these two processes, and second to present this first as this sort of introduction of predication, and to say, okay, you have a space where this kind of slices are mixed up in many ways, and we want to start asking questions and see if how things fall under these predicates or this set of predicates, right? So for example, in the example of the red flag here, the black flag here, this is another red flag. So these things are very contained. So if I ask something like, the red flags, I will get this thing here with both this red flag and this red flag absolutely belonging to this predicate, right? If I ask flags, I will get these three things here with all of them absolutely belonging, right? Perhaps there is one flag that is kind of crappy. It's not really a flag. It's just like a sheet. But so we start, it's like we introduce a different function than the function of appearing. That's my point. Like this ID function has this dual status and it's looking for differentiation. It's a way for us to simply map intentional relations, right? Intensive relations. And now we're asking something else of this space. We're probing it with a different thing, which is just a predicate, and which can be composed of many predicates. I think Dennis raised this point, and Badiou raises it. For example, he analyzes in the world of a demonstration, we have a bunch of people. For example, we have X, Y, Z, and he says, let's imagine a predicate that has 5 sub-predicates. And it's, let's say, a hierarchical definition of what an anarchist is. Like, it wears black clothing, it looks like it's mean, it's kind of saying crappy things about Trotskyists, it's threatening to break some window or whatever. But with this predicate in mind, you can go to the world and see what falls under it. Like, and you'll say, oh, this guy here falls kind of half under it. The guy is wearing black and he's looking menacing, but it's not really threatening anyone. This guy here falls absolutely under it, right? And he says, well, you can do this sort of component analysis of what is, let's say, under a certain set discerned by a predicate. So it's a different way to probe into the world. And then he gives you, this is the reason why I think this is important to distinguish, because he constructs the idea of unity in a world. So of the thing that is counts as an objective unity in a world, based on first on 2 conditions, right? The first condition is this analytic condition, which is actually the one that he actually defines this arrow here, which says, well, if you can come up with a predicate, so you can arbitrarily define one, but if you come up with one that, when asked about the world, gives you maximal value, so the thing that answers to it answers maximally, like 100% of answer, right? Like that guy fits all the predicates that I assigned to being an anarchist. What falls here is either one thing that falls maximally or nothing falls maximally, right? So if the analytic kind of helps you to slice up the world in a way that you can select something in the world in that resolution, right? This thing will count as an atom. And I think that this is an idea that I already like a lot, because I have the impression that this is a nice way to relate, let's say, predicates and a sort of idea of resolution. Because like the anarchists in the guys here in this demonstration, I could have sliced them up in many ways. For example, I could have chosen a different resolution or a different kind of approach to the world and ask something like, people who are sick, or people who are tall, or people who are holding hands or whatever. It would give you different ways of slicing this thing. Like, these guys here are totally under this predicate, this guy here is not that much under that predicate, and so on. But the point is that there is a sort of interesting idea that to arrive at something that counts as a unit or as a one in this space, you need to also kind of adapt to a relevant idea of difference, right? To differentiate people based on height might not give you an atom in that world, or it might give you an atom, and this is the second condition that I think it's useful to think about, might give you something that, even though it's unique, in the atomic sense doesn't allow you to correlate with others and localize them with regards to this in a way that tells you something about the differential space you're in. So, for example, in the space of this protest, if we started talking about, let's analyze people by height, you could do it. You could see these people are shorter than those people, but you wouldn't be able to, let's say, capture anything. You wouldn't be able to capture in that unity the difference that makes a difference in that world, right? So there is a sort of double condition at this point, which is at some level, the predicates you're choosing, they have an analytic condition. They should be able to select something. Like if they select something like this, only one should be maximal, right? And everything else should be minimal. We'll see why this is the case. And the second condition is also that, well, you won't be able to, afterwards, to move towards, let's say, recomposition of this world, or to move laterally in a world once you define this atom, if it doesn't really capture something of the differential space where you're in. So kind of the way I'm imagining this is almost like at first we had a world like this, and we were asking questions about stuff by moving up. And then it's almost like, rather than looking from this general out perspective on the space of differentiation, we are trying to locate something inside the world whose unity is very much entangled with the difference of that space, right? So it's both a unity in the sense that that predicate or the resolution or the way we're approaching the slicing of the space is giving us something unique to hold on to, but it's also giving us something that captures the information about what differentiates in this world, right? So this means that then we can ask questions about these relations in this direction rather than from above. So it's kind of a move, right, from a more exterior view to a more interior view. Like this. And that's how I understand a bit this first arrow here. We're coming up with a different way to select things, and I think that it's crucial that this introduces on one hand the problem of predication, and on the other hand some level of arbitrarity, that you can get it right or wrong, right? It can be possible or not. You need to find something that discerns something which is both atomic, in the sense that it's maximally belonging to that predicate and doesn't have many things belonging maximally, but at the same time, it still captures something of the difference of that space. For example, you could, in the world of the protest, there is a guy holding a cat. It's true that you can talk about the atoms in the cat, and it will only give you, let's say, that component, a part of the cat. But you can't really relate everything else to the part of the cat in a way that allows you to extract information from those relations in the same way than if you selected the red flag and you compared other stuff in the protest to the red flag. And kind of concluding our reconstructive part of the discussion today, we get to the postulate of materialism, which we really didn't have a chance to talk about in the detail that I think it deserved, but I also don't think we will have, I mean, if we want to go to the end of the chapter, I don't think we'll have time today as well. But where is it? He has this statement. Well, first of all, he shows that that he has what I call the synthetic aspect of the atom is contained in these two axioms of atomicity that he says, right? to allow the atom to coherently support the idea. Just a second. Right. So you could have the analytic. This, I think, this passage here shows that these are two conditions, right? It says, sure, you can select a component, a way of analyzing a world that will give you something that is unique, but you, besides this analytic condition on how you use predicates to slice a world, as a sort of backdoor entry into difference, right? You also need some syntactic conditions, which are here containing these axioms, which define how one atom relates to the to other atoms. And where's the other one? How you identify components with regards to the identity function. So these two axioms guarantee that there is some kind of general coherence between that global view we have and this local view. So my understanding is that this passage from this kind of lateral move from the identity function to the phenomenal component and this kind of predicative approach, which is a different way of slicing up a world, you want to kind of get back, like make sure that whatever it is that you select as your kind of way of separating parts of a world, that this way of separating parts of a world both gets one, at maximum, one thing that totally belongs to that predicate, and second, that, well, whatever it is that does belong maximally obeys these two other axioms that guarantee its coherence with the identity function, right? I think that this is really, really, really crucial because, I mean, I think his examples with the painting and so on are not the best examples in the world, but it's really crucial because it tells you why it is that in a certain painterly world, for example, in this multiple here, where, I mean, this could be analyzed in an infinite ways. Like you can analyze this just based on the different pixels, right? And this can give you a certain matrix of RGB, I don't know how to say this in English, like information. You can talk about like a spectral analysis of colors here, and from in that world, right, where this multiple plus a transcendental that is defines differences, right? That what differentiates things are pure color, pure frequencies. For example, this little part here is very much different from this part here, because this is very bright and that is very, like, this is greenish, almost yellow, and this is greenish, almost blue or very dark, right? In a different world, for example, one where figures count, so the imagery in this painting counts, it makes a difference. This whole thing here is actually very similar. It's all part of the same thing, whereas this thing here is more distinct, right? So when we get to the predicates, it's kind of like you're getting back to the same idea that in different spaces, different, oh my God, this is a really weird sense. In different spaces, different differences make a difference. But you now need to find, let's say, it's not so much what sort of difference, I would say, but it's almost like a zooming problem, right? Are predicates that select, for example, I don't know here, like this little dent, which is just like this thing, or better, let's use the example that Badiou himself uses. Like there's only one part in this painting which is blue, which is little thing here, right? The blue scrap is a predicate that gives you, for this part here, it absolutely belongs to it. right? Is it a relevant weight? Is it a relevant resolution, or should I divide the blue scrap into parts? Like this is more blue, and this is another frequency, and these things are absolutely distinct from an analysis of colors, for example, right? So how you kind of superpose into this grid of differentiation, which is the ID function, right? A grid of, let's say, this is like smaller differences here count, or bigger spaces count. Like, what is the resolution of this grid? It's kind of how I approach the passage from the phenomenal component to the atom does, because the resolution of the grid, right, in this very kind of intuitive, vague way that I'm defending, defines what counts as a part. For example, this figure here, or if I should divide it further and only consider that the head is an atom. Because I could do both. Nothing prevents you from doing one or the other, right? It depends on how the part relates in keeping the coherence with the transcendental of that world, right? With the ID function, like those two axioms define. So the postulate of materialism is just do it on top of this. It's something that Badiou adds on top of all of this, saying, look, you've used predication to kind of explore ways of composing what counts as a one in this space. And so you move from the component to the atom, and this thing counts as an atom because it respects those two conditions. An analytic condition that it's unique, and a synthetic condition which has to do with those two axioms that guarantee some correlation with the ID function, right? And he says, if something respects these two conditions, then I'm postulating that it also respects a third thing, which is what the postulate of materialism guarantees, which is that if you manage to single out something in the painting, that through predicates that make it unique and that respects its coherence with the identity function, then there is an element in the multiple of this world, right, that supports that atom. So it's a kind of move from this logical closure of the space, and I think closure here in the sense that the way that I kind of imagine this is just do something here. Imagine that. So if you have like a figure in the painting there, I don't know, whatever. You could divide it into smaller bits or parts of it, and further down, right? Or for example, in trying to avoid the cat example, but anyway, you could further divide. So this is some statue, and this is just the head of the statue. This is the arm of the broken arm. This is the broken leg. This is the other leg. There is a kind of closure in the sense that it's almost like you could further analyze it. You could zoom in as much as you want, but at some point you stop here. Like, so we don't go into we went from the figure to the parts of the body. They're relevant, but the parts of the parts, they're no longer capable of respecting those two conditions, right? The analytic and the synthetic. They're not unique, perhaps, and they might not keep the coherence with the ID function. What he's saying is that if you stopped at this resolution, if you zoomed into a point, that when you were looking at the parts of the parts and you zoomed at this part and you stopped, it means that there is something in the actual world here that supports this degree, but this level of atomicity, right? So in some sense, there will be a correlate, which is an extensional set behind it without the vagueness of it, right? So if I can't really zoom in into this picture now, but if I stop, for example, at the level of the column, so the inner degrees of the column, they're not like the inner differences of the column, they are not, let's say, atomic. They are below what I could predicate about and learn about the whole situation. They're too specific, let's say, right, to be to shine a light on the painting as a whole. If I stop at this level here, which is the column itself, that means that in the painting there must be a way to separate this multiple here. So you can never stop at something which is virtual. You need to stop at something which has, let's say, a correlate in the multiple itself, right? So we went from the ID function to that phi function. Simultaneously, we opened the inquiry into the component, and we defined what an atom is, which is something that respects those two conditions, right? So this is actually alpha of X. It respects the analytic and the synthetic. And then he says, if it does this, then it's supported by something that belongs to the multiple itself, which is, let's say, the ontological condition.
Yeah, I think this this point here should be thought alongside being an event and the ideas of situation and multiples in general, because the same applies. A similar thing applies in multiples, where every multiple can be decomposed into further multiples.
Yes.
Right. So the postulate of materialism is interesting because it says, like, you actually don't need the closure. I mean, sorry, you don't need to keep going downward. You can stop at a certain point, and that level of the multiple is already enough to sustain the world.
Yes.
Right. The hierarchy of multiples does not need to be
all the way down.
All the way down. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys think that this has to do with the idea of compatibility that he introduces later on? I mean, the fact that we cannot go down is at some level, the elements of the multiple at the lower level are not compatible with each other. And hence does not satisfy the condition of compatibility that is required in order to provide a synthesis.
Yeah, I have the impression that the two things are slightly separate, because I think you can have an atom. I mean, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have the impression that you can have an atom that it doesn't allow you to stitch stuff back together, right? That it is coherent with the general differentiation of a world, doesn't necessarily mean that it. I mean, if I understand correctly, isn't that the distinction between pre-sheaves and sheaves? Like, you can have a world where this kind of fragments are possible. That doesn't mean that you have enough conditions to glue them back together, right?
Yeah, I think I rescind my comment, because there is nothing within the condition of atom that says that the elements that belong to the collection, which we call atom, those elements have to be compatible with each other. There is no such a condition. Yeah,
the reason why I say this is because later, I mean, when we get now to the like the local analysis, and I mean, yeah, once we get to that, you will see that there is actually a way to evaluate if things, like how you generate atoms from that particular atom, right? Once you found a certain atom, you can check if it is, let's say, if it can localize everything else with regards to it, right? Guys, just 1 second, I need to answer something here. Pretty quick. But yeah, I really want this. I mean, I think that from the previous things that we saw, this is the most important thing to get from it. Like this idea that what he calls an atom of a world is a very particular interplay between what logically coheres with that space. So that adds those two restrictions to it. Logically cohere, for me, it means, that's how I read the component thing. You can explore you're exploring differences that make a difference in this space through this predication. Like you won't be, it's preferable to try to separate something unique that has some connection with the law of differences of that world. Nothing prevents you from doing it with something else, but then you will only be analytically finding something unique, but you won't be guaranteeing that that unique thing carries over some information about the differences in that world.
Yeah, I mean, it's intuitively, it's like the way that language also implies a closure, right? Because a lot of times, you know, your sentences don't have some global meaning. They're localized, right? In what context does this statement make sense? That local boundary of when that sentence makes sense, that can be conceived of as the atomic closure of a world. So the ontological substrate, the multiples, are only necessary to allow for that, and just enough resources for this logical or semantic situation to play out. Something like that.
Let me just 1 second. Okay.
Like if you're watching a play, right, or a movie, you don't really need to know about the actors, right? Yes, the actors are there. They have their own personal lives. They have a lot of things, a lot of information that's tangentially related to the film, the background of the film, the production history, and all of that doesn't show up in the film itself, right?
Yes.
Because it's not necessary to make statements about the film. So this closure, this thing that we're seeing mathematically expressed, also has just a very general, like, I would say, like, analytic, philosophical sense, right? A closure of a field of sense.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I'm trying to find a way to make it, like, to really hammer this point home, right? That the thing that like the structure that defines the sort of differences that differentiates things in this world, it's also kind of giving you the basic constraints under which you can choose something unique that, like, this becomes locally a question of certain things that you can choose as unique in this space. Now we'll have information about that space, and some will not. So, for example, if I see, and there's a counterexample to your question about actors, because, for example, there's clearly a contamination in Hollywood by the fact that if I see a character to be Tom Cruise, I know that the likelihood that he will die is very little. So that is, unfortunately, that's relevant information for a movie. But in a certain sense, you're right? If you could say, I can ask questions like, who is the actor? Like, let's say it's a movie only with unknown actors. I can ask that question, who is the actor? And I will get an atom, because there will be only maximally one person falling under that name. But that doesn't, even though that gives you an answer that accepts the analytic condition of atomicity, it will not give you something that is falling under the syntactic condition, which is an atom, like a unique component that has still, let's say, is still trapped in the web of information, of differential information of the movie world, right? So you see, like, it's the articulation of this analytic with this syntactic questions or conditions that define the scale at which something is relevant and under which something might not be, right? And it doesn't mean also that if something is below this level or it's not an atom in this sense, that it will not be localized as an atom by it later on. So once for example, if I'm in a zoo and I see an animal, surely I can ask questions about something very specific about that animal, like the fur or something like this. But to separate the fur, it's to go kind of a bit too far if you're interested in the logical coherence of the zoo, where animals are divided by cages and divided by species and divided by other criteria, right? That fur it's kind of fell under the law of differences of that space. I can still localize it rather than asking questions about animals from the standpoint of the fur of one animal. I could do the inverse. I could have localized the animal, chosen the animal itself, like the tiger, as something unique that I can separate and that has some information about that world. And I could then localize the fur of the tiger as a new atom from the tiger to begin with, right? So to say that there's some logical closure in a world doesn't mean to say suddenly you become blind to everything else. But somehow you no longer call that fur a one, you call it a part of that one, right? You somehow this difference, this mereological difference has been distributed. So you see, like, it's kind of a way that this sort of different this mereological structure is now kind of coalescing based on the law of difference, right? In this space, I can cut off at any point, of course. I could go into the multiple that has multiples inside, that has multiples. This whole has parts that has parts that have parts, but some levels will be more different than others. Like some levels will be more relevant, more filled with, yeah?
The law of difference is built around the elements that are the multiples that are in that world. Like, for example, in the painting, we say that the two front columns are not different. They're very identical. So the identity of those two front columns are M or is near M. But the fact that they are two different columns at the end, meaning that there are two multiples, despite their difference or despite their identity, is still respecting the fact that these are two different multiples, right?
Yeah, because the multiple that is two, right? I mean, from what I understand, the fact that this selection here, it's also a multiple, right? This is a multiple, and this. So C and C2, but let's say the multiple 2 columns is also a multiple.
Right. So let's start from let's examine this. So when you write the transcendental indexing or the function of appearing, and you say ID alpha and beta, or C1 and C2 in this case, you still in a very intuitive way, you're saying that the question is that how do you even separate C1 and C2? I think at that level, the level of function of appearing, alpha and beta or C1 and C2 are different multiples within that world, right? So it's a very rudimentary way or very intuitive way to say the function of appearing takes different elements or different multiples of the world as they appear in that world, and we just compare them together. The phenomenal component question is a little bit more fuzzy. The phenomenal component is building a collection that may be part of the same multiple, maybe consisting of different multiples, and maybe both. So you can say all the orange things on the picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all the orange things on the picture could be part of a skirt, which is not one multiple, it's just part of one skirt, and could be a column, which is one multiple, or multiple multiples, such as two different columns. So what I'm trying to say is that the question of phenomenal component is making the naive selection of multiples and comparing to each other a little bit more, it makes it a little bit more complicated. So for example, I don't see it, but I think that orange dress on the servant of the woman who is right there, part of her, for example, part of her skirt is orange, let's say. Part of a skirt is not is not a multiple, the way that we say skirt, for example, whereas the entire column is one multiple. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I think, yeah. But I think from what I understand, that way of saying things like this thing here, like the whole skirt in this painting is a thing, but part of it is not a multiple.
Whereas for example, I'm just making an example.
No, yeah, but I think that this is something that is being generated. This is not something that is given, right? I think that, I mean, trying to keep to the debates on difference, this whole differential approach, which is not really how we were doing it before. I think that we can also bring another word here, which is it's the discussion on the atom. It's a discussion on what is stable, right? What, let's say, once you define that this is an atom, things inside of this can be very different and can change a lot, but this is what gives it unity, right? So for example, if this is the column and this counts as an atom, inside of this you can have incredible differentiation, but this will not affect this unity here.
Yeah, what my question is,
but it could be different. Like it could be the case that only this counts as an atom.
Yeah, look, for example, look at the vase on the left of that fountain. Not all the vase, not on the left side, or maybe that one. Not all of it is orange. So when you say orange, and let's feed this to a computer program, like who doesn't understand the concept of a column or the concept of a skirt or and say, return the coordinates of everything that is orange in this, right? Well, it will return the coordinates of many different pixels that matches the predicate with a degree, and then the coordinates of part of this orange vase will match the predicate orange maximally, and part of it match the predicate minimally. So what I'm trying to say is that the phenomenal component part what is relevant to it is not the naive recognition of what is a multiple in this case, what is the count as one in this case. Like, for example, we understand the vase and the surface of it is just part of the vase because we are already equipped with the knowledge that this is a count as one as a multiple. But if we don't have that knowledge and we just provide that predicate, then there is no way to recognize that as a multiple. Now, what I'm thinking is, but you says that's not a problem. That's not a problem at all. The whole point of this transcendental logic is to be able to reconstruct multiples in ontology through the way that they appear in the world according to various different predication. So the whole thing, when you read to the end, and his comments that the full ontology of the full ontology of appearing, or the full ontology of the world, is a two-way trip by which you can go analyze things to the nth degree and be able to construct them back and make, in various different ways, make multiples back again as count as one. This is a kind of thing that I'm thinking.
Yeah, but you see, like, the thing that I'm just trying to point out is that for certain worlds, under certain laws of difference, stopping at the fact that this is, that this is a figure, and that these are columns of the figure, that this is a tree, that this is a statue, like that at the level of the figures, the computer is a bit confusing, but I agree that this holds even for something that doesn't work with the concepts that we're talking about. But to stop at this level and then to talk about what's the other parts with regards to the figures, this becomes a part of the column. This becomes a vase with regards to other vases. Like, this level of coherence is the level that captures information about this world in such a way that I can move both inside of it to localize parts of a statue, and I can move outwards to localize the statue in front of the temple. And this level where I stopped my resolution captures information about this world, the world of figurative things. If I were analyzing this in a world of where colors count, colors make a difference, stopping at this level and making these distinctions and talking about behind, in front, inside, it doesn't capture the information that I'm interested in. Because actually having like an analysis of this thing here as a certain frequency, and this thing here has a different frequency, and this frequency is very similar to this, but it's very different from this. This is the level that captures the information that allows me to talk about this space. So okay. nothing like, he's giving you the general theory for how to coalesce, like how to arrive at what level this is. So the general form of the question, in my opinion, is what are the conditions for a certain level, a certain mereological structure of parts and decomposable parts and bigger parts and things like this to be the relevant resolution for a given world, right? Correct. And this can, I agree with you, for certain worlds, that resolution will be something for which we don't even have a concept for, like in the sense of vase, right? Mm-hmm. For example, in the world where we're analyzing colors, there will be nothing that you can do combining colors to each other that will give you the concept of this vase as a vase that is localized to the left and to the right of this. Like, you will get something else.
Yeah, I think you both are talking about something that we sometimes refer to as a implicit sortal restriction. Like when you say, in your example, Gabriel, of the zoo, You look at a tiger and a child says, "This is my favorite." It's his favorite thing in the world. It's his favorite animal in the zoo, in a sense. So there is an implicit sort of restriction. So you are talking the best, your favorite among these kinds, in a sense. But I don't think Badiou stops at that. This is what I think it's interesting. Like, you can derive sortal talk from what he's presenting. And then I think that's what Reza is pointing at. You can derive sortal talk of the formalism he's presenting, but you can also arrive at something that doesn't have a predication already in place for it, like the pattern recognition of a neural net, in a sense that will arrange things in ways that are strange for us, right? So in a sense, it's like the scale is there, but the scale has something to do also with this sortal restriction. Like in the world of a figurative painting, what are we looking at? We are looking at figures. So this is like a sortal restriction. So what's in the painting? Somebody accustomed to figurative painting will say, oh, there are people, there are columns, there is a temple, or something like that, something like a temple, some trees. So there's this implicit sortal restriction that makes up a world, in a sense, at least for humans that are able, concept mongering, all that. But I think the formalism is rich enough to account for this, and also to account for the strange crossings that the neural net will make in order to.
But also, I mean, because actually painters don't work with concepts like this. Like, I bet the guy who painted this painting, he gave very little shit to the fact that this is a column compared to the fact that the so my point is that you already cannot do. Okay, I know how to summarize my issue. What I wanted to show is that we define the world, and we show that from a world we can learn some things about this ID function. The reason why it's so interesting that he separates this inquiry from the inquiry on the components, which are these predicates, and it's not a given predicate. We don't know what the predicate is. We don't even know exactly what defines this law of difference. So there is a gap here. We don't know what it is. So he's not telling you that knowing this will tell you what predicates you should choose. He's just telling you that whatever you choose, it will be an atom if it has some relation to this.
That is correct.
So this is very important, because it's not
that is
saying
very
like,
important.
If this is figurative, then predicate should be about figures. Because
that's exactly my point. The point is that if we, like the way JP was explaining, he explained it very well. If you put the constraint of figurative painting aside, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we don't recognize these figures, or nor do we care. We are working with the apparatus of the transcendental, and with this apparatus, we are able to construct objects and multiples as one, and be able to name them X, Y, Z, or whatever. We call it pattern recognition.
Sure, but look, this is just what I wanted to say. Like, figures are not appearing here. The world of figurative paintings, figures are appearing here. So it's effectively better to use these things as relevant like constraints on your predicates. It's not because you know this to be transcendentally guaranteed. Like, look, it's a figurative painting. You should use figures to define your predicates to find atoms. It's actually,
I guess in this case we are saying the same thing.
Yes.
I think we all are saying the same thing. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think we're just looking for the nice.
Can account for predication and also for other kinds of pattern recognition. I think that was what Reza was talking about. So I think everybody's saying the same thing in a sense.
Yeah, I just wanted to show that. I think we're just struggling to find a nice formulation to what it means to work around composition and the definition of objectivity in these terms, because it's something like saying the proper object, like an object in a, like the grounds brick of an object in a world is informed by the best way to, let's say, slice up that world in such a way that you find something that is both unique and still informationally relevant to reconstruct it. Now, what predicates will fall under that? If they are human predicates, if they are inhuman predicates, if they're unknowable predicates, we don't know, but we can deduce from this structure that they will have to fit those two conditions, right? And then Badiou adds a third condition, which is whatever it is that we get, so whatever it is that this optimal point of, let's say, predicative efficacy is, it will correlate to a multiple in the set, right? So it will not be just a virtuality. Like, for example, you could say, yeah, there is, like, it's very important in the world of this painting, this sort of greenish hue that appears in many places here. It's not really a point of green, it's kind of just this average greenish. He's saying, fine, you can choose this, but there must be something in the painting which is actually extensively that green, right? So you cannot have atoms that are virtual. If an atom that closes off the logical, like that touches on the logical coherence of this world in those synthetic and analytic senses, it will have some support, right?
I guess we are saying the same thing.
No, I think we're definitely saying the same thing, Reza. I just think that it's nice to try to formulate this because it brings together so many elements from different philosophical approaches into like one concisive kind of proposition, right? Like it gives you the general, like it gives you the infrastructure of a space of differentiation with the transcendental. It tells you like basic constraints on what appears in that space, even though it's not telling you how to appear, what it appears as, nothing. It's telling us that we can kind of probe into the space in such a way that we will find some logical closure at an undecomposable level, which ontologically could be further decomposed, but logically will lose its informational relevance, right? And that's...
So, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say is, I think because of this, I think his transcendental analysis really starts from a phenomenal component, because it is from phenomenal component that we kind of really get a sense that what he means by multiples in the transcendental indexing ID alpha and beta, or existence of alpha and stuff like that. Those are all very abstract alpha and beta. They are not figures. They are not any particular things in the world.
Yeah.
When we get to the level of being able to recognize, for a lack of a better word, a pattern that we call atom, that is really where we get to that level of discussion from the phenomenal component. That's why I think the importance of the motivation for phenomenal component is the beginning of giving some sense to what a unity is. Whereas before that, the concept of unity, that is just putting a letter in the formula ID alpha beta, is just an abstract algebraic thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why I think that it's very important to make the distinction between the things we can know because there is an order structure over a certain multiple, from the things that we know about that order structure. Like we know that there is, and we can deduce some stuff about it, but we can't really say anything about what is being compared, how it's being compared, how it's being evaluated. So I agree with you. The first time that we can start talking about a thing being evaluated, right? And it's something that it's in a way that it's not, that doesn't presuppose any given, right? The thing that will count as an objective support here, as an atom, is a totally logically constructed thing, ontologically construed as well. It's constrained by what there is, but how it is defined as this basic, how is it objectified, right? It's totally defined by this logical space, which we, for now, don't really know much about. So in a sense, I agree with you. It's the first time that we know something about it, perhaps.
And the reason that it is important for me is what JP said is, in order to free this logic from anthropomorphic references, like to human language and human conceptions and stuff like that, I think it is the same way, I mean, the same mental obstacle we all had, everybody has, with being an event, to understand what a situation is, what a multiple is. Because at that level of abstraction, there is no reference to any anthropomorphic conceptions or any references to language. Unless we do that, unless we keep track of that, that aspect of Badiou's language, of what he's trying to do, we won't get the full richness of what he's proposing. We don't get his at the very if we don't approach it that way, in my view, the best we can get is just another way of providing an analytical basis for the description of the world, the same way as language. Whereas he's doing something a lot more, something that a non-anthropomorphic process such as neural net can also process and be able to recognize patterns that our human brain is not capable of recognizing. What he's providing is that rich.
Yeah, I agree. Though I would say that to twist it around a bit, in Badiou's argument, what, for example, artists do is more inhuman than neural networks. Because neural networks can find predicates that we cannot find, but artists can also find stuff that actually has no predicates in the world. So, like, he can actually prove that, in that sense, there are practical procedures that can be more inhuman than a very inhuman language, right?
True.
But I totally agree with you. And I think another way of putting it, which also points to this sort of kind of broader perspective over, let's say, our usual descriptive apparatus to talking about the world, is that it's giving, like, if we arrive at what counts as an atom in a world from previous conditions, what we're doing is define, let's say, the infrastructure for something to be a predicate in that world, right? So we're one step behind a given predicate, because in a certain sense, okay, sure, you can ask many questions and you can slice things up in known and unknown ways, but whatever it is that actually gets to count as this sort of atomic component, it will have to fall under some previous formal constraints that are not defined by, if we know, understand, can explain what a predicate, what this predicate or this particular discernible principle is, right?
Yeah, in some sense, Badiou has already unleashed the gates earlier when he says that mathematics is ontology, because mathematics is already inhuman. So he's just importing this to the world of appearances. But the idea of a inhuman predicate, or a predicate that makes no sense to us, is already what mathematicians do when they talk about n-dimensional spaces and crazy topological shapes that have no real, existence in the quote reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Okay, just so we now move on, my idea is to move very quickly over this part, just so we can focus on the functors, the functor part. So actually, I think we can use that crazy drawing, this one. So yeah, we discussed now the idea of a real atom, which is this basic idea that, well, if something if something respects those two conditions to be an atom, which we discussed at length now, for him, via a postulate, he's saying that there is actually something in the multiple itself that supports it, right? And this gives him the definition of what an object is. It will be a multiple plus an ID function where all the atoms are real atoms. So this is a very broad, weird, in fact, definition of object, which he is very well aware that he defines something new. He says, well, I'm just in the process of doing something else, I'm gonna give you a totally new definition of an object. Because it's new in the sense that it has this double structure of being informed by ontology in the sense that whatever you decided as an atom, it has a correlate in the multiple, but it's logic, so it has some ontological constraints, but it's actually logically defined as this point of differential closure for a space, right? So objects are not ontology, like what is there in being objects. No, objects concern worlds, but they concern worlds in the sense that almost like an objective view on a world is something that puts yourself in the level of the atoms of that world, right? So to move quickly here, he then talks about certain properties that atoms have, so that you can start, and the crucial part here in the atomic logic is that once you define an atom, for example, A, you can ask a question about, okay, but what does A, for example, you call it A of X, right? What does A of X have in common with some degree? So once you define this thing, you can now ask, what is its relation to some other degree? What does it have in common with it, right? And he shows that what holds for this as an atom, so the conditions that we saw above here, right, also holds for an atom written like this. So once you define this point of closure in this space, this logical point of closure, which has this ontological support, you ask what it has in common with some region that has degree P. That localization will also have atomic, you can generate atoms in this way, right? So localization both talks about the conjunction of some atom. So actually it's talking about so if you have an atom, right, and there's something else, the identity of these two things and its conjunction with the degree P is actually what he's calling this. But once you do this, you can also generate a new atom. So once you have this real atom, you have a new atom. You can also define based on, and if you have a new atom, it's a real atom, meaning that it's also localized on a particular support, B. If you have atoms like this, you can inquire to their compatibility, and this is a very crucial clause. So he defines compatibility between two atoms to be the same thing as asking about the localization of one and the is when the localization of one on the existence of the other is equivalent to the other being localized on the first existence. So when this is the case, we'll see that this is very crucial, because you can define order based on compatibility, and everything that follows in terms of syntactic power depends on this being possible, right? So we define that it is possible to generate new atoms. We saw that if you generate with this atomic analysis now, based on this particular point of logical closure of the space, you can ask if these two atoms are compatible, right? We can actually expand this, right? So A with IB is the same as asking like this. So if this is the same as the ID of B of X with ID A of A, they are compatible. And he shows that you can recover an idea of order out of this. So I think that in the local level, this is the crucial part, right? To show that once you have localization, and with localization, you can define compatibility. You can also start talking again about ordering, but now you're ordering atoms. You're not ordering just degrees. So you recover something of what defined the transcendental order, right? We were always analyzing P and Q and so on and so forth, but now we're talking about atoms. We're locally talking about stuff that is supported in the multiple, and we have recovered something about the idea of order. That's why we're moving out of the local back to something that concerns the general norms of differences in the space. So at this point here, we get, let's say, a kind of a three approaches on the same thing, because we have this idea of localization, compatibility, and we can order these things, but we still don't have an idea of, let's say, how to bring them together, right? Which is what we get at the level of the regional synthesis. This part of the chapter, it's actually a detailed part, because first he defines, let's say, a subset of this multiple, right? We have a multiple, we have some atoms in it. And let's say these things here are subset B of this multiple A. Actually has B and B line, right? If B and B line are compatible in that sense that I showed above, right? We can find the envelope of this region. Then there is a problem, which is we don't want simply the envelope. We want the least upper bound for it, right? We want to be able to make sure that how this gets localized is in such a way that we only select this union. We don't get more than what we're trying to separate. And that's what the whole end of this, the real synthesis is doing, right? Trying to find a way of constructing the existence of a given element E such that it is the envelope of everything that exists in B, and that E is smaller than, it's the least upper bound of this region. I'm sorry, we're moving too quick. I actually wanted we to.
But this is an ontological envelope, not the envelope that.
Yeah, that's what we're starting to see here, right? That's we're now looking at, and this is where the transcendental functor kind of exploit this fully, it seems. But we're no longer simply defining stuff, right? He says it himself, like at this point here of the analysis of the identity function, the phenomenal component, we're always moving like this, right? We have a multiple, and we're seeing how it's, what are the degrees in the transcendental, right? At this level here, we start seeing that the postulate of materialism is the first thing to make this claim that, well, if there is some coherent way of finding these things that give you maximal value under the component function, that this has a correlate under an element, right? This is what so the ID function and the phi function are here. The postulate of materialism is the first thing that gives you, let's say, a retroaction on being. And from the atomic logic on, we have this we're starting to explore it, right? So we see that these functions here, which are the atoms, they are already very much more constrained. But at this point here, I think that I don't think that this is, I think this is the point where we start getting, actually, now that I think of it, I don't know, why did you say that this is an ontological envelope?
Yeah.
You mean because it's enveloping a region of the multiple A, right?
Exactly. Because
Okay,
the concept, it was a minor comment, because the concept of envelope was among transcendental degrees, whereas this is an envelope within the actual elements of the multiple.
Mm-hmm.
According to the greater, that order, ontological order.
Yeah, and let's see if this is better. I'm worried that this is too arid.
Too fast.
Compared, yes, we're going too fast anyway, but we don't have that much time. Yeah, I'll just go through this definition because we're trying to do.
I think if you go through the functor, we have to revisit all of this anyway.
Yeah, so yeah, we'll need to. I'll just skip it. Yeah, so from what I understood, this crazy thing, yeah, I think that other window was better. So after constructing this regional way of recomposing regions in the multiple based on what counted as an atom, you get to the transcendental functor, which I think is the first time that he explicitly is talking about something that moves from T back to subsets of A.
Yeah.
Right. So I think this makes very kind of, in a certain sense, clear a sort of, there is something that correlates at transcendental degrees to a sort of spatial or analysis, right? So we'll see that there, in a certain sense, the relation between kind of slices of the multiple, the underlying multiple, if the relation between slices of the underlying multiple respect, like coding this into a slice of the multiple, evaluating the relation between these slices, if it gives you the same, then to simply transcendentally evaluate the degree and then code it at the end, right? If this commutes, then you found a way to learn about the transcendental degrees via the relation between stuff in the world, right? So this is how I basically understand it. Like, if you're capable of doing this, which is selecting in the multiple things that have, for example, a same degree, right? He defines the functor of P as a way, it's a slice, like it's a subset of A, such that the existence of anything in this subset, so the existence of whatever in this subset equals P, degree P, right? So we kind of use the transcendental to constrain a subset to get an output which is a subset, which only has degree P of existence. Right? Now, he says, okay, what is the relation? The first step is asking the question, what is the relation between constraining, finding, kind of defining this subset based on a degree P and defining this subset based on a degree Q? Right? so the first kind of line of inquiry in the construction of the transcendental filter is asking, okay, I know Q is smaller than P in the transcendental. I know intensity Q is a smaller intensity than P. Now I selected in the world a subset of a certain multiple based on everything in it that has degree P of existence. I can do the same for another degree. But the question is, I know this relation, but what about this thing here? What is the relation between this slice of the world and this slice of the world, right? So using a very inconsistent system of lemmas, which he defines, like he comes up with a lemma D, and then a lemma C, and then a lemma God knows what, and you cannot find anywhere else in the book where it was called lemma D to begin with.
Yeah, it is in the appendix.
Okay, so I didn't find it there. He shows that it is possible to define this I don't know how do you say this letter here?
Theta.
A function theta such that.
Oh, that's you mean the function that he's defining is the function that is between these lines. That's not you wrote theta, but that's not theta. That's a phi, yes.
Yeah, I don't know why he wrote something different. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I think in the book it's like this, right?
Yeah, because theta, he uses theta for territory.
Yeah, I used something else for territory. God knows why this thing was changed. But anyway, it holds. So he wants to define something such that in this function for a certain degree Q, to evaluate an X, it localizes it on Q. Right? So it uses localization at the level of the multiple to be able to extract information about this relation here, right? So he shows that this is possible. And then he says, okay, we have two problems now. So I know that I can do this. I know I can select a slice of a where everything has degree P. I know I can do this. I know I can do this for degree Q as well. And I know I can come up with a way of localizing a degree X here on a degree Q. But now I need some extra conditions, right? I need it, and he calls one is I call it the analytic and the synthetic because I think it fits. But the further condition is it possible to kind of select a representative of this slice, right? He calls it EXQ. Which it's actually called the projective representation of the territory, right? Can I get this territory FA of Q, which is a slice of A, and finds, let me see how he defines it here. Such that for every Q that belongs to a territory, I know that there exists this typical element that belongs, right? This is the definition of the projective representation. Actually, this is something I didn't really understand why this is a necessary condition. I know I do know, because you need to be able to, so you, okay, I think this is the point. Right, I know that this is an order relation of the transcendental. I'm using a localization here to relate this subset to this subset, but I want to be able to actually envelop it in such a way that this is a territory and this is the envelope of the territory, right?
Right. I think one way to say this is, like you began to say that this is the first time that he's moving from T to A. So basically, the idea is that he's what the functor, the way that I understood, is trying to do is, given the internal logic or ordering within the transcendental, can we use the same logic in order to basically synthesize the way that we synthesize transcendentals or degrees, can we also synthesize the world? So how do we synthesize? What is our tool to synthesize the transcendental? Is envelope. Envelope synthesizes a territory by being the envelope for that territory. Now, given, let's say that we have a territory within T, which he calls theta, if we basically use a functor in order to find slices of object A through degrees within that territory, which is theta, then can we find an envelope for those elements within those slices of object A? So that's the basic dilemma that he's trying to solve. That he basically uses the internal logic within the within the transcendental or within the topos in order to provide a similar synthesis for the actual space, like you said. Some algebraic properties in order to basically find the properties for some spatial objects.
Yeah, but the thing I still don't understand very well is that I understand that we spend a long time moving from analyzing the world to the differential structure of that world, and now we're saying, look, once we have we found a way of navigating this that defined atoms, real atoms, and we know from this that we can start moving around here in accordance to these rules.
Yeah.
Right. And now we're going to use these rules, like we're going to give a general form of using these rules to reconstruct this back. Right.
Correct.
So find ways of slicing it. But what confuses me a bit here is that the thing is done in two steps, right? The first step at this point here.
Yeah, that's just that commutative diagram is just the apparatus we use. Has nothing to do with the actual story. It's just an apparatus. It's showing us what is the relation if degree P is greater than degree Q, how we can, what does this greater sign tells us about the actual elements within the object. So
yeah,
that is just the apparatus. The story begins when he chooses a territory within T. So it says, now let's say that we have a territory within T. That territory within T has an envelope of P. So what we want to know is if you use the functor to map elements from theta to the world, and we get xq1, xq2, xq3, xq4. Actually, we don't get that. We get slices of fa, this function. How do I get my pointer back? I go where? I forget.
There should be an annotate function in the menu bar.
It's at the top of view options.
While you're looking for it, what my question is.
I got it. Okay. So can you see my mouse pointer?
You try to draw something.
Right. Okay. So so we get a theta. This is theta. So theta is a subset of T. Now from here, each element, say Q1, gives you a slice of A. right? Within this slice, the whole thing is called this. This slice is called this.
Yeah.
But then you have other slices. You have many, many different slices. Slice 1, slice 2, slice 3, for each degree within this theta, Q1, Q2, Q3. So that's the first step, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then he takes another step. He says that we get a typical element from each of these.
Yeah, this is this step here.
Exactly, X2, X3. We get typical elements. And from these elements, we create what he calls P, or what did you say the name is? Projective something.
Representation.
Projective representation. Now it says this, our problem of the problem of synthesis of theta boils down to the problem of synthesis of this P, and that is an element which is called epsilon. And we show that epsilon, which is the element within A, existence of epsilon is equal to P which was the envelope of this theta anyway. So here we are mimicking the logic precisely. So the logic within the transcendental, which P was the envelope of this region theta, becomes the epsilon, which is the envelope for this P. But this is an ontological ordering, whether this is a transcendental ordering. That's what he's trying to say.
So, but what I don't understand is these things here define subsets, right?
This thing defines subset, like these lines, these are slices.
Yeah, so I'm not really managing to understand the drawing there. So if I have a world here in the transcendental, we have an order relation here like this, and we're now trying to, for example, we know that there is a whole kind of region which is a territory for Q, and we're now trying to find ways of like
territory for P.
Yeah, Q forms a territory, right? Q belongs to the territory.
Yeah, theta forms a territory, Q is inside theta.
Yeah, okay, and this gives us like, for any Q here, it's equivalent to certain slices here, right?
Correct.
Why do we need to find a typical element in Q?
Well, that is what he basically explains in the previous chapter, that the typical element, I don't know, the short answer is I don't understand his motivation, or is he skipping something, but it is such an important step, and he keeps trying to say that in the first and second section, that you basically choose a typical element from each slice, and then you find the envelope for those typical elements. That is such an important step in the whole thing. And on top of this, the elements that you choose in that typical elements are all compatible.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's the atoms.
They are atoms, but they are atoms within each slice. There are many, many atoms here. So it's an atom
yeah,
here.
So basically a typical element is just moving from the subset analysis to the atomic analysis. So
yes, but then creating another set of these typical things, which he calls projective representation.
The projective representation, from my reading, it's just a picture of the transcendental in the object.
Yeah, I think that's more like what I understand, like here.
The
territory is defined as a slice of the transcendental, so a differential structure, right, in this sense. XQ is defined as something that belongs to the slice in the world, right? Is a correlate in the slice, in the functor of FAQ, from the territory, right?
Yes.
Sorry, this is the actual definition of the projective representation is when for every Q, some XQ, yeah, this is, yeah, sorry. Yeah, then there's two conditions actually. The projection representation is not enough, right? It's the coherent one where compatibility is guaranteed. I think this is the crucial thing, right? That
this is the most crucial thing. I mean, two moves that
right. So understand now, like
yeah.
This is the T. So you're using a certain territory here to find a slice such that there every X, sorry, let me just do this right. Every element here not only gives you, not only the existence of it has degree Q, but they are compatible between themselves, right? So another XQ here is actually compatible with this one. So it's not like to find the one typical thing. To find a typical thing is to find something that is compatible with the other somethings in that slide.
I mean, the only thing that's in this diagram, I would say, so the original diagram was, so here you have, this is one Q. This is theta, right? This is theta. And this is one Q, this is another Q, this is another Q. Each of these Qs give you different slices, right? Let's say 3 degrees and 3 slices.
I don't think, really?
The whole, yeah. The whole thing is called FAQ. This is the
okay,
whole
no.
thing.
Yeah, I was calling this FAQ. And I think that it's the only difference that now we are calling this slices.
Okay.
So yeah, he's just constructing the homogeneity like he's guaranteeing that there is a homogeneity in the slice, in the subset of the world that is evaluated as Q, right?
Homogeneity inside the projective representation.
Yeah, which is then called coherent projective representation, which is the slice is homogeneous.
Correct.
Okay.
But you asked a very crucial question that, I mean, he does not show, or at least I missed it, I didn't see, the operation by which he chooses a typical element. He did not show. He explained it in the Gaugamela war, that how he's choosing a typical element, but he is not showing the mathematical apparatus, that how a typical element is chosen from each slice. Like, is it the maximum in existence? Is it he's not explaining it.
No, yeah, I have the impression that it's just that if you can find a slice in the world defined by a territory Q. So you can have FA of Q that is a slice of things that, right, are,
FAQ is not a slice. FAQ is the combination of all the slices.
Yeah, I think we're calling slices different thing. I'm calling slice just a subset. But this subset might be heterogeneous, like in the sense that it has a bunch of Qs inside of it, but it's just things that have Q degree of existence. That's just what it is.
So the way that I
as an extra condition, he says, for this to work, these things can't only have the same degree of existence when evaluated in T, they must also be compatible.
Well, I think the way that I understand it is this. I think the structure is a little bit more complicated. The structure is a set of FAQ is a set of some sets. Each set is the degree of existence on one Q, so Q1. So set 1 is degree of existence of all the elements in W that has existence of Q1. And then another set of elements whose existence is Q2, another elements whose existence is Q3. So the whole thing of set 1, set 2, set 3 for Q1, Q2, Q3 is FAQ. Now, he does not say, nor he probably needs to say, what's the relation between those sets? It's just different slices of W. But
it's inclusion. That's their relation.
Yeah.
FAQ
is included
is a part of FAP
Yeah.
or whatever. Whatever's
No,
after
what I'm
Q.
saying is FAQ1, FAQ2, FAQ3, FAQ4, right?
No, but look, why you're calling
They're
1,
included,
2, 3,
yeah.
4? I think he's just to clarify the notation, because I think this will help out. Like FAQ is already
A slice.
it's a subset where everything, all X's that belong to FAQ have their existence is evaluated as Q degree in T.
Correct.
So I don't know why to differentiate them as Q1, Q2, Q3. Like,
oh, because theta has Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. And P is not made of just one of them. P is made of the representative elements of FAQ1, FAQ2, FAQ3, so on and so forth.
So you're saying Q1, Q2, Q3, they're different degrees.
Yes, within
The
theta.
transcendental, yeah. And you're saying the envelope of that, but the envelope of that is just another degree, P.
Right. So the envelope, the entire theta is P. Within theta, there are Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. The transcendental functor of each of these Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 provides different subsets of many elements. Then you choose a representative or typical element from each of these subsets, and then you make the projectile or the projection.
Yeah, what I'm saying is I think FAQ1, FAQ2, if you union those, you get FAP, right?
If you union those, you get all the degrees that are Q, but you don't get FAP because well, if you union those, yes, that's the ultimate ontological proposition. Yes, you get epsilon. You don't get you get FAP.
yeah, because I'm just trying to get to. I mean, I understand the fine grain of making the kind of half step, right? That if you have the world, you have the transcendental, you selected a certain territory, and okay, let's call this a subset where all X's have degree Q, and you can say, well, but a territory where Q belongs to the territory, there's still other degrees here, right?
So you don't get another slice.
So you'll get another one. That's the. So
that's what I'm saying. Yes.
Here, the existence of X will give you Q2.
Q prime, let's say.
Yeah. And then you're saying, okay, compatibility is guaranteeing some homogeneity between everything that was in this territory.
No,
right?
no, not everything that is in the territory. Homogeneity is between typical elements from Q and Q prime.
Okay, so, yeah, that makes total sense. So what we're saying is that, okay, if I have a slice where the existence of it is Q prime and another slice where the existence is Q, I just want to make sure that there is some XQ and some XQ prime such that these two are compatible.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean that this and this here are also compatible, but some level of intersection, like some commonality exists between these two.
And what I'm trying to say is, I could not surmise from what he said, what is the operation by which you choose a typical element.
Yeah, I think he says if there is a typical element, not like how there is one, right?
Yeah, yeah, but still you need to be able to construct it.
Yeah, so just to give like the broad stroke of what we're doing, what he's showing is we know something about the ordering inside the transcendental, what we call the differential space, and now we're trying to go back and say, you selected some slice of the world, which he calls the functor P, and so on. And we want to know how to glue this thing. What are the conditions under which these slices, how they must be related in such a way that the enveloping or the union of them will give us, let's say, something about the general structure of this space, right? So what you were mentioning now is that the first condition is how to define this homogeneous intersection. That's the relation between the coherent projective representation, right?
Well, actually, the slices don't intersect because they're completely their conjunction is empty because one slice is Q and the other one Q prime.
No, but
the order relation translates to a inclusion relation. So if one degree is smaller than another degree, then the FA of that means that that smaller degree is a subset of the other one.
Yeah, I think that this is why he's going further than that, because I think at this level here, we don't have enough information to reconstruct because this is a subset level. So he wants something that is like at the level of the elements so that you know more about what's inside of here to guarantee that the union actually gives you this general picture, the global picture, right? And from what I understand, the projective representation, the coherent projective representation is a way to guarantee some homogeneity between the subsets. Well, and to talk about homogeneous subsets is to talk about some property of the elements of those subsets. So to know that there is something like a typical element that is compatible with another typical element.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that that is not inclusion. So
sure, no, it's yeah, no, I don't think it is. We're constructing a notion.
We are constructing, exactly.
We didn't arrive at
XQ. You pick XQ and you pick XQ prime, not because XQ and XQ prime is within the intersection of FAQ and FAQ prime. You just pick them.
No, sure, but it's like we are constructing an idea of intersection, which is what compatibility is also about, right? Compatibility is a way to look to it boils down to a certain form of conjunction, right? Because compatibility is defined on localization. Localization is also defined on conjunction. So it is kind of if you can say that some things are like homogeneity is this sort of specific idea of commonality between, let's say, these elements of the subset FAQ. Right? I think this is what this move is all about. It's saying, look, it's not enough to be able to define a subset based on a degree Q and a subset based on a degree P. Like I need some added structure inside of this so that I can guarantee compatibility and by that guarantee homogeneity inside the subset of the world that I separated, right? And then once I have homogeneity, I can start asking about what it means to envelope this and to create a union of homogeneous things. Because if there is a union of homogeneous things, then I'm actually covering the space with the proper information.
Everything you're saying is sounds correct to me. The only problem that I have is, I guess I said that before, is the construction of that projective projection.
Yeah, no, but I think he says it. Yeah, he says it the way that he constructs it. He leaves a space there because he says, is there such an envelope that localizes on the typical degree? So when I try to find that common part of the epsilon in the slice defined by Q, that it gives me actually the typical X, right? And he says, well, if there is, right, in the same way, if the presentation is coherent, I have the impression that this.
But how do you construct it? How do you construct that? I mean, the fact that if we assume, and in his proof, he says, let's assume that P exists, the projective representation exists, but how do you make sure that it exists?
Well, I
How do
think
you
the way that he
construct
does, this is how I understand it. Like, he presents, like, this is how I understand the construction of the chapter. Like, he poses this question, right? Like, I know how this relates to this. I know how to select this, and I know how to select this. Is it possible to relate this to this? And then he says, yes. Okay, but this, which is this point here, right? This is not enough, like, for me to be able to actually glue these things together in such a way that the information about the differential law of this world is preserved and so on. So I need more. What do I need? Well, I need to answer two added questions now. I need to answer the question is, can I define some specific localized idea of homogeneity between, like, inside these slices, right, with regards to Q, with regards to, sorry, to XQ. And second, can I construct an epsilon such that it is, let's say, it's the way that it's localized on the degree Q, it's on the nose of the typical element that I define.
Exactly.
So he asks these further two questions, and then the way that he constructs it is by showing that I think that he gives you a definition of this, of the typical element, and he says, well, if there is such a thing as this typical element, if for every Q I have this, I will call a coherent projective representation this, but he doesn't tell you if it must exist, right? Then in parallel, he says many times in the chapter, suppose this problem to be solved. Now let's ask the second problem. Is there such an epsilon that is able to synthesize this region? And he says, if, the way that he does is that he says, if there is epsilon, then this thing here should hold. He goes on to show what would follow from it. Then he asks if it exists. Is there such a thing? Like, is this such, which I understand to be a question of, is it coherent to expect this thing to exist?
Yeah. If
and then he says
page,
it is coherent, and if it's coherent, then we can remove the if here, right?
If you go to page 292, this is what I'm trying to say. Maybe I miss it. You can explain it to me. On page 292, he has two bullets. He says, our problem boils down to these two problems. The first one is the selection of the XQs representing the elements of the territory theta.
Yeah, that's what I call the analytic condition, right?
And the second one, the determination of a single element epsilon, blah, blah, blah. So the second one, no problem. He shows that. But the selection of the Qs representing two elements of the territory theta, he says we assume it exists. He talks about its properties. Later on, he talks about that if such a compatible element exists, then it has these properties. But he does not talk about the selection of the Qs, XQs. He doesn't say how this selection has taken place or will take place.
I believe they happened during when you defined the atoms previously. The fact that there are atoms means there are XQs, because every XQ is an atom.
Yeah.
And the compatibility of atoms is the compatibility of the XQs.
You mean proposition 7 in the last section? Yes, he uses proposition 7 to say.
Yeah, proposition 7 enters the picture somewhere here, I think.
Yeah, it enters the picture to say that there is an epsilon that basically envelopes, ontological envelope of the projective representation. But again, the question is, how do you construct it? In proposition 7, he says, if there is such a region exists, whose elements are compatible.
Yeah, on page 292, he literally says, let's suppose our analytical problem has been resolved.
Right. He never shows this. I understand what you're saying, Dennis, but my expectation was to show, because he's not starting from a region, he's starting from a functor, and from the result of the functor, he's creating creating a projective representation. The step from the result of the functor to the projection representation.
No, he shows it. I found it. It's on page 294.2.
No, point two is just to say that the localization of epsilon.
Ah, yeah, it's on XQ.
Right. Anyway, I couldn't find it.
Yeah,
he
right.
just moves through it through examples. He's not showing this. He's not showing how from the result of the functor you go to why the result of the functor, or how the result of the functor should always give you, because that's a crucial step. Otherwise, you cannot map.
Yeah, but why? What I don't understand is, for example, in the complete form of the ontology of worlds, he defines it. He says, we call coherent projective representation of the territory the association to every element Q of the territory of an element of the functor of Q, say XQ, which possesses a certain property. Q belongs to the territory, Q prime belongs to the territory, the corresponding elements XQ and X2 prime are compatible with one another.
Yeah, but why?
What do you mean, why?
How? Like, how can you make this assumption? So again, let's move through the motion.
Yeah, I just have the impression that he doesn't consider it like, for some reason, I think he assumes that the reason for this being acceptable is kind of transparent. And I have the impression that, as Dennis said, the fact that XQ and XQ prime are atoms should solve it, right? Because
yeah, so if you go to the fundamental theorem of atomic logic on page 263, the definition of there uses the same character epsilon, right? An envelope.
I mean,
yeah.
being an atom is not enough though, because being an atom.
No, but that's not what he's doing.
And in the italics section right below that, it says, is this proposition 7? I don't know, but it says
that's lemma E psi.
Yeah, lemma psi. If the elements of B are compatible in pairs, so this is the Q, right? Q and Q prime.
Mm-hmm.
Which page are we on? 262?
263. If you have a B, capital B, which is a subset of A, such that all of its elements are compatible in pairs, then you can envelope it, and that will be guaranteed to be an atom.
Yes, so that is important for step number 1 on page 294, right?
Yeah.
But my question is, how do you make such an assumption that a region like B exists among the result of the functors? How could you assume that?
But I think he's saying if it doesn't, then there's no functor.
Yeah.
No. Functor is there, because you can always use a functor in order to basically map a degree to some region of the world, or collect some region of the world according to their existence equal to some degree. But my point was that it's a two-way street. I think if he's using this functor in order to create different subsets, among these subsets, he's choosing representative elements precisely for the purpose of those representative elements to be compatible. I'm saying, what's your guarantee? What's your method of construction?
Yeah, it's the postulate of materialism.
Yeah.
Wow.
The postulate of materialism says that if this logical condition works, then like if we can find a pi of x, which is a logical entity, right? It's a set, a logical set, not a ontological set. The pi of x is a, you know, an atom. The postulate of materialism says that there's a corresponding multiple.
Correct.
And that corresponding multiple is what is in FA. It's the representative in FAP or whatever.
I get that. I get that that's an atom. That's what postulate of materialism says. But why these atoms are compatible?
Because they are defined by enveloping previous atoms.
No, then it is cart before the horse. You're begging the question. We want these elements to be compatible in order to get the envelope.
Okay, can we just because, I mean, there are other people in the Caron is very silent, and I worry when he's like too silent. Caron, is this making any sense?
Not sure. I'm really tired now, so I kind of.
He was.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's just because, I mean, sure, it's an important discussion to be detailed about, but I mean, we're supposed to cover other stuff, and I just think that it's important to keep in mind exactly, like, to be able to reconstruct where the problem lies. Like, did any of the transcendental factor reconstruction make sense to you?
What was the question exactly?
No, because we're stuck on one point here on this thing, right? The transcendental functor is connecting like degrees on this thing to slices of the world whose elements have that degree.
Yeah, this was clear enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same thing for another one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then the question is, what can you do? What added constraints you need to have so that working through the localization of these things here, which are like we already know how these things work, right? Localization, compatibility, in order, so that we using these atomic operators on this stuff here, we can get the logic that is there, right? So the thing that we're stuck on is that Badiou explains how this FA of P and FA of Q work, and he explains that you need some condition, which is that this thing here actually it gives you a bunch of X, right? A bunch of stuff in this subset called FAOQ.
Yeah.
The question is, you need this XQ to have an additional. So this is actually like a bunch of those XQs with a certain degree, a slightly different degree, and so on. You need them to be related in some way, so that you can start gluing these things to other things. Like you need to be able to select a typical element and inquire about its relation to, for example,
you select like an average, and in order to define a region, and then in order to glue one region to another.
Yeah. So exactly, he wants to construct this idea of homogeneity. Like what else needs to happen for this thing here to be homogeneous enough, so that if you have an epsilon here, we can come up with the union of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
What Reza is showing, Reza, am I correct to summarize it in this way, is that the guarantee that having these slices here, like a slice which is XQ prime, a slice which is XQ double prime, and so on, moving from this to the idea that there is some compatibility between this. He doesn't show how, or if it's necessary. Is that it, Reza?
Oh, it is necessary. He doesn't show how.
Yeah, it's necessary for the functor, but it doesn't show how it's necessary, how it's constructed. So what we're asking is if this doesn't follow from the very definition of atom, of real atom. Actually, now that I think of it, isn't this precisely what, I mean, how is this step here taken? XQ is defined, there is XQ, and then
yeah, the arrow that you have here, this arrow, how do you account for this arrow?
yeah, this is where he says where is this? He says yeah, and actually, I have the impression that this is actually more important than like the fact what you call a certain circularity. I think is more important than I thought. I think Dennis might be right that the compatibility clause here that is hard to derive, it's connected with the existence of the epsilon. Like if there is epsilon, they are compatible.
Yeah, but this is begging the question, like I said. You derive epsilon because of the compatibility. You cannot say now epsilon exists and this is exactly what he's doing here on page. If you turn, that is what I thought, but then it didn't sound right to me, because if you go to page 292, at the bottom of the page, it says, let us now suppose that in a general case, we can equally resolve the problem. There exists a synthetic epsilon, right? So this is exactly what you just said, Gabriel, that he's assuming epsilon is there. From the existence of epsilon, he derives the compatibility on page 293, right? But that's not, then in page 290, but that's not a proof, because in page 294, it says, let's suppose that the exists a coherent projection. So that is what I think I'm missing something.
Yeah, I think that I think I get the point. Like, because what's at stake here is not to prove that there is a regional envelope. That there is a regional envelope has been proven in the real synthesis. We know that there is a regional synthesis of atoms. That's the lemma.
If the elements are compatible.
Yes. But
so that's exactly
no, but the question of the elements are compatible, like if the question if elements are compatible is actually settled much earlier. Like we know exactly what we mean by compatibility and what they need to be compatible. And we know that there is a correlation between order and compatibility. If both elements are smaller than C, they are compatible.
Right.
So we already know that if they are both smaller than epsilon, they are compatible.
But we don't.
Equivalent. Yeah, we know.
How do we know?
Because that's what we call the relations between relations. If A is smaller than C and B is smaller than C,
that's the objective. That's the objective we want to show. We want to show that they are less than epsilon. And in order to show that,
I think that for regional, for regional parts of the world, for regions of this world, we know how to show this. It's the global coherence of this that is at stake. You see my point? Like the real synthesis or in the lemma pi, e, epsilon, phi, and so on, all of that already tells us that these things are equivalent. If I can't find an envelope, they are compatible regionally. That doesn't guarantee that the global analysis is done. So the step that we're trying to understand with the functor is not, is there compatibility? Is there an envelope? Those things we already know. What we don't know is, okay, knowing this is enough to know about the global coherence. That's what's at stake.
My understanding is different. My understanding is everything that he showed, such as the regional enveloping or apparatus in order for us to use here. So within the regional enveloping, we learned, like Dennis said earlier, that if we pick a region whose elements are compatible, that region has an envelope. But that's a big if, that if the elements are compatible. So I have no problem with that because the assumption is clear. In here, we are constructing that region. We are constructing that region from an earlier operation, which was the functor. And then we are making an assumption that the region we are making is made of elements that are compatible.
I'm not sure that's how it goes, because the way they understand it, this is not like, the way I understand it now, these things here, showing that there is an epsilon and showing that there is a typical element or the coherent projection, these are actually, let's say, smaller. Actually, these arrows could be the inverse, right? This is regional, and this is global.
Every territory is defined by a lowest upper bound, right?
Yeah.
Least upper bound.
Correct.
Meaning that every territory must be, all the elements within that territory must be compatible.
Within the transcendental, yes.
Right. So once you map that into FA, like FAQ, right? FAQ is a set of elements which have existence Q. Then aren't they all compatible by default then?
Well, that's what we want to prove. What we want to prove is the logic within the transcendental can tell us about the logic within the world. That's the whole postulate or the ultimate ontological theorem that we want to prove. So he's trying to prove it. So what he tries to do is he uses the concept of the functor to map degrees to elements.
To subsets.
To subsets of elements, exactly. And from that subset of elements, he creates a region. And he says that that region, since the elements of that region is compatible, then there is an envelope. My question is that the region that he's choosing by choosing representative elements, how can he assume that region is made of compatible elements?
Yeah, then I think that the way you presented it now, I think Dennis was right, that compatibility was always defined in that way. So to slice a section of the world where all axes have degree P means that it's kind of correlated to the territory of P, right? I think that already assumes compatibility. Like,
Why?
if P belongs to the territory and Q belongs to the territory, P and Q are compatible.
Compatible, well, first of all, compatibility is not among transcendental degrees. Compatibility is about atoms.
Yeah.
And
but
elements,
you know what I
right?
mean? Like, I'm just skipping a
So
step.
the concept does not have a,
Okay, let me rephrase it. If E of X equals P and E of XQ equals Q, and both of them belong to the same territory, X and XQ are compatible.
Why?
Because if I define the territory, it means that it has a least upper bound. It means that the value of X and the value of XQ are both smaller than that upper bound.
Upper bound of an element. And that's the objective of what we want to prove.
No, but again, we also know that the localization of a lesser degree on a higher degree is also an atom. So I can also just, okay, Rather than define it, I can call it the localization on Q. I mean, my impression is that we're just using localization, order, and compatibility, which are things that we already have the machinery for. Like, I think that's why this is not really considered a big problem. Like, how do I know that these elements that belong to this slice and these elements that belong to this slice are compatible? I think the fact that we know something about the transcendental, which concerns the upper bound of both of them, of their degrees of existence, already tells us something about their compatibility.
Well, xq and xq prime, there are two elements whose existence has degree q and q prime, right? We want to show that xq and xq prime are compatible. We have to show it either using a topological definition of order. Where is the definition of compatibility? We have to show that the localization of, well, we can do it several ways. We have these lemmas, lemma A, lemma B, lemma C. The actual definition of the compatibility is that xq localized on the degree of existence of xq prime is equal to xq prime localized on the degree of existence of xq. This is what we need to show. We need to show a proof like that, that if we get a slice from, not a slice, if we get a region of representative elements of these fit the definition of compatibility.
Okay, but let's go through it. Let's go through it. So the ID of xq x in conjunction with the ID of xq prime must be equal to the ID of xq prime x conjunction with the ID of xq. What's the identity of xq with xq? We know what it is. It's q, right?
xq is q, xq prime is q prime.
It's also q.
xq prime?
It's q prime. Yeah, now that I...
And we don't know anything about q and q prime. We don't know if they are bigger, smaller. We have no idea.
This is where I was having a problem with your definition to begin with, because he never wrote fa of q prime. Like fa of q, like q belongs to the territory. Q and q prime belong to the same territory, right? So here, isn't this the point? Like, for every q that belongs to the territory, the existence of it has the degree of x. There is an xq that belongs to that slice, right?
Yeah. So if you have a q prime, then there would be an FAQ prime.
Yeah. So q belongs to the for every q that belongs to the territory, there is some xq that belongs to the slice in the world, right? And he's saying then that this is the part that gets you, that if for every q and q prime that also belong to the territory, xq is compatible with xq prime, meaning that xq localized on the existence of xq prime is the same thing as xq prime localized on the existence of xq. And you're saying that this thing here is not something that we can guarantee.
We cannot derive. We can assume that if xq and xq prime are enveloped by epsilon, then this will hold. But this is a lot. This is begging the question, because proving that an epsilon exists is exactly what we are trying to do. If you look at the page, look at page 294, 92, 93. He says he derives xq and xq prime are compatible on the condition that they are all less than another element, epsilon. And then he says that this means that the degree of the second paragraph, this means that the degree of existence common to xq and xq prime, that is their maximal common existence, cannot exceed the measure of their difference. Being compatible means that two elements coexist just as much as and no more than, so repeats all that. It is only on this condition of compatibility that we can hope fully to solve the problem of the transcendental projection, or to accomplish the retroaction on pure being of the synthetic capacity. Similarly, we remark that the synthetic value of the element cited chariots presuppose the rule of compatibility, the one implied by Darius' battle plan. The reason that I read that is that it seems that he's borrowing from something outside of this and saying that there was something that we already assumed made all these elements compatible. He's not showing anything. Anyway, I think
he always says, like many times, it's always like, for example, in the next paragraph, it says, we ask whether under these conditions, it's possible to find the functor P a single element epsilon. And then on the definition of worlds, he says, let A be a set, Fa is the transcendental functor, we call territory of P the theta thing, we call coherent projective representation the association of xq such that xq and xq prime are compatible. Under these conditions, there always exists an element. So he calls.
I mean,
but I think he's satisfied with calling it a condition. Now, I think we should inquire as to why is he saying compatibility is a condition, but not something that is constructed.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with what he wrote. I mean, what he wrote is correct. I'm not saying what he wrote is not correct. Maybe my conception is a little bit incorrect, because the way that along with the earlier discussion we had, was I see the movement from transcendental. Maybe this is a math thing that I don't have. You guys know about toposes a lot more. I'm just trying to learn more. That when you have certain things, there are objects called toposes that you can construct a whole bunch of logic within this topos thing, that you can then from that logic build the spaces or derive the internal logic about the spaces, the topological spaces, right? So the same thing appears to be happening here, that within the transcendental there is a logic. There is always guaranteed that having a territory, we have an envelope, but in order to project that logic into the multiple or the actual world, you have this additional very hard condition that somewhere the elements have to be compatible. Otherwise, this projection will not work.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, and he gives us, let's say, different ways of us checking for compatibility.
Is this the correct understanding?
No, I follow what you're saying, all that, the way to that. Like, the functor is all about, let's say.
But isn't the elements compatible because the functor already selects the elements that are compatible?
I don't see it. That is what Dan is saying, but I don't see it.
This is the way I understand this. This is why I'm kind of a little lost for the last 40 minutes or so, also because it's been a long day and I'm kind of tired. But from it seems the functor itself selects from the compatible elements.
Like,
No, I don't think it does, because I mean, I think it's halfway between, the way I get it is halfway between what both of you are saying, in the sense that we know how, once we got an atom and we know how to generate new atoms, we know how to assess their we know that they will be compatible because they were generated one from the other. And we know that we will be able to talk about their ordering, and therefore we'll be able to talk about their enveloping.
This is all built in the idea of an atom.
Yeah, I think that's what Dennis was saying. So, but the
Yeah.
point is that this gets us only thus far. Like, this is only a regional synthesis, right? The real synthesis is like the envelope for a region. The question of the functor is, under what conditions are these regional envelopes stitched together in such a way as to give a global picture? So up to the region, up to the regional consistency, the atomic generator is enough. It localizes other degrees, which are atoms, which give us compatibility, which give us ordering, which give us the envelope of a particular region. But the functor wants not only to find these slices, but to relate these slices. So FA of P, FA of Q is like a very general idea of slice of the multiple. But the question is, okay, how do you connect them in such a way that you preserve the information, the transcendental information, so that the order structure of the transcendental is preserved in this spatial envelopings, right? So I have the impression that part of the answer is, like Dennis said, yeah, the regional coherence, the regional homogeneity was given by the atomic logic, by the previous chapter. And part of the answer, I agree with, my impression is that I agree with Reza, is that there is definitely a circularity in the way that the scolium is organized. Because he says, to arrive at to prove the compatibility will have been proven if we find an envelope, but the envelope is only possible if compatibility exists. Reza, is that kind of the circular that you found? Yeah, so my impression is that
with one proviso, that from what I understood from the previous chapters, having an atom or having atoms, being able to construct atoms, do not guarantee compatibility. Compatibility is just a condition that you add. So you can build the atoms, but there is no guarantee that you construct one atom and another atom that they are compatible. That's an additional condition that you need to add. But everything else, as I agree.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, my point is that if you know how to generate new atoms, you have the tools to evaluate if they're compatible. It's not that they will all be compatible, right? Because you still need to see if the existence of one with regards to the other and so on. Yeah, so I agree that there is this this thing. Just to finish, I mean, I don't think we're going to solve it because apparently this is not in the text in a clear way. We can kind of flood our chat afterwards with our classic scrolls of commentary. But one thing that I didn't want to miss out is just that I've spoke about this with Dennis, and it did seem to me like a nice approach that can be used for many things. And it seemed to me like a good example on for the whole atomic logic and how atoms, compatibility, localization, all these things actually play into the synthesis. I came up with a little way to talk about film montage in a way that I think helps to work through this. Perhaps it's a good example to work. I mean, I wonder how the question we're asking would fit into this. So, for example, I came up with this by looking at Luisa's work. And so imagine that you have a shot A, which has like a man running and a red background, okay? You have a shot B, which has a man running and a blue background. and you have a shot C, which has just a red apple. Like, not what interests me was to realize that nothing requires you to decide what is, I mean, it's a good example of that logical closure of the space, actually giving you the connection between analytic and synthetic parts. Because, for example, if I glue in my editing room A and B, so these two, right? What will have happened with this is that the man will function as the atom. So this is the thing where the compatibility is actually being defined, and the background will be localized by the man. So for example, this is what guarantees that this and this can be glued together, right? That there's some homogeneity between these two shots, whereas the other elements in the shot, for example, the fact that the background was red and here the background is blue, will be defined as with regards to the man. So for example, we will call this the place where he was, the background, and we will say that the place changed. So we get an idea of movement, for example. But I could have glued A to C, where you would have a man against a red background running, and then you would get a shot of something which has nothing to do with the movement and the figure, but whose compatibility is actually defined by the color. That's what guarantees the homogeneity between these two shots. And the man is actually localized by the color. The color is actually what counts here at first, and the man is secondarily defined with regards to it, right? So this sort of, so this here where, let's say, color is more relevant, here the figure is more relevant. But you see, it's a good example of how what counts as a unit in an image, for example, is not really ontologically intrinsic to the image, though it's constrained by the image, because if I didn't have the red background here, it couldn't be one of the atoms, right? But the logical space, which is defined by AB or AC, is constraining what will count as the, let's say, unique thing with more information, which gives you the synthetic coherence. So color is giving you the synthetic coherence here, whereas here it's the figure and the movement, right? So I like this idea because you get a kind of view where this thing here actually is a swarm of atoms, and this as well. And depending on how these things are intersecting here, how the commonality is defined, which is more synthetic, you get an analytic of the image, right? Where it's going to be sliced in terms of figure and ground, or in terms of color. And the fact is that you don't need to always have the same thing guaranteeing it, right? You can now have a third image here. For example, I glued A to B on top here. And then on the third image, I can put C. And now the connection between these two things here can be at the level of dramatic relation between running and the food. I don't know, some thematic relation. So I don't need to guarantee that what makes these two things glue together and what makes these two things glue together is always the same. I only need them to locally glue, and these things to locally glue for the coherence to be guaranteed, right? Sorry, so this way of dealing with that, let me just find out how to erase it. Like this way of dealing with the, let's say, logic of montage kind of helped me to show that, for example, the connection AC between the man running and the apple doesn't necessarily, if it really connects something where color is like giving you the atomic closure, it won't create a sense of time, for example. Whereas AB, where the figure and the movement is relevant, even though it's the same images, you kind of construct a sense of time inside of it, right? So depending on how these things are synthesized and what is described, what kind of collapses as the atom of the things you're combining, you can, from the transcendental, arrive at something which is has an inner time, or something that remains, let's say, almost like spatial, like you only get a sense of juxtaposition, not a sense of continuation or sequence, right? So you can actually see how the transcendental proceeds, kind of, if things will count as space or if things will count as time in a certain sense, right? You can construct it, like, you need to presuppose it inside that space. Like I had some stuff planned for us to do. Of course, we can't really go into like details of this sort of thing. My idea today was to show how this sort of approach to how two shots are sliced, right, between, let's say, a principle of color or a principle of figure or a principle of some thematic or dramatic aspect, which is something that the same thing that conjoins, so the same thing that defines the synthesis, also defines this analytic, right? And furthermore, also is ontologically supported because it must be something in the image, right? It's actually extensively there, extensionally there, sorry. So ontologically also guaranteed. It kind of summarizes these three conditions and shows how they are actually logically conjoined, not substantially conjoined, right? There's all these debates in how to compose, decompose images in movies that imply that there must be something like a basic unit in a movie. And I think that the theory that we are discussing here, it kind of decouples the analysis of what counts as an atom in an image, what counts as a part of an image. It kind of allows you to derive that locally from the interaction between from the unfolding of that coherence, right? But anyway, I just wished I did.
This is good. This is good.
So my point, I think that, for example, if talking about this, for example, a sequence of shots, right? It's talking about, let's say, so these things here are compatible in a certain way, these things here are compatible in a certain way. We can say that, well, a certain shot that comes here relates to all of them, right? So this guy is running here, running here, running here, here he arrives. So the arrival kind of is a stopping point to everything that comes before, because it synthesizes what was at stake before. So this is like just a regional synthesis. Where everything that, all the disposition inside the image is defined by the way that it was connected, right? So the logical synthesis is actually part of the constraint of the analytical of the image, right?
Yeah, I like this because I think we can actually transpose the earlier debate here.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get at, but please help me.
Could you actually bring that back? Because I think
Sure.
that's the perfect example here. I think, let me use a different color first. And then let me choose like orange. I think we can think of the FAQ and the FAPs as this. And we can think of this element as the epsilon. So orange
Yeah.
here is like the Q's, right? This one, the blue is the P. Sorry, let's just do FA, such as this. And so the debate is, how can we guarantee that the epsilon exists that synthesizes the previous ones, right?
Mhm.
How do we know that there's an A scene that can synthesize the previous ones? I don't know if this is an answer to the
No, but I
debate.
think it's a good, for example, I think I can give now a
Transposition.
concrete example that shows the difference, right? So for example, imagine you had a shot A, which shows something, and a shot B that shows something else. Like, so this is the man running, this is the apple, right? And this here is some other unrelated thing, like a building. If these three things are not compatible, meaning if there isn't something that makes these two things compatible, for example, the man is running towards the apple, so some drama, and then we open this shot to a space. So this is like, look, spatial localization. The apple is inside the house. If there isn't this compatibility guaranteed, right? I cannot say that a shot that comes afterwards relates to all of this. I can only say that it perhaps relates to this one, right? You see the difference? Like if these things are not compatible between them, if there's no criteria under which I can say that they are homogeneous, even if they're stitched together and they're only homogeneous in this way, not totally homogeneous, but homogeneous in this sense, I cannot say that this shot here will refer back to all of them. I will say that it refers to this one. So for example, let's say this shot is the house is exploding. There is a bomb falling on the house. This is a bomb. Okay, if you didn't connect the house to the guy, you won't say that the guy is threatened by the bomb. Right? You'll say that the house is threatened by the bomb, not this whole thing is threatened by the bomb. So the only condition under which seeing this shot tells you, oh my God, this whole sequence here is threatened by the bomb, is if the sequence was compatible. Right? So that's why you need both things. You need to be able to define this as something that refers, it's the least upper bound of this, and you need to say that this is compatible. But I think this clarifies why the question is circular, because to say that this shot is the least upper bound of this sequence is already to call it compatible. Whereas to call it compatible is already to say that this is the least upper bound. Right, so this is the syntactic question. Is this the upper bound of the previous sequence? And this is analytic. Are these things compatible between themselves? Right? So do they form a sequence? That's the analytic question about compatibility. Is the shot that is coming later referring to it, right? Referring to the collection of previous shots. That's the syntactic. But I think that the example helps to show that these two things are very tightly connected, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense.
What I like about this is that it connects all the concepts that we were seeing before in a very clear, like in a very kind of specific theory that doesn't require you to have a unit defined. I think it applies very nicely to music as well. That's what I wanted to do with the unanswered question, which we don't have time now, but we can do it some other time. Like what defines a unit of sound, like an event, a musical event, for example, doesn't need to be temporally defined by a chronological pulse or by a grid. Like the grid will fall into place depending on the relation between events. right? And the relation between events is synthesizing the temporality of the song, of the music, right? And I think that the unanswered question is really beautiful in this sense because it very clearly has events that envelope. Okay, I cannot keep myself from doing this. So you just so I'm trying to keep Karan awake. So like, let's just find a moment in the score here where you get some.
Yeah, this keeps him awake.
You guys don't get a sound, do you?
No.
Here.
Oh,
Here.
yeah, the sound doesn't work like that.
Here, it should work now. Of course, at the moment that I say this, okay, so where were we? Yeah. Somebody's saying something here.
Yeah, the question will be repeated afterwards. It's right there, the end of the last measure.
Ah, yeah, you have the question.
Yeah.
So for example, here the same logic can be used to generate, I mean, and I love the fact that that Ives doesn't even like, he already hints that the answer and the questions are the actual temporal markers of the, let's say, existence of this world, because the actual sheet is not even fully coordinated, right? Like these sections are not even totally coordinated on the same axis, like for the value of the nodes, right? But it kind of works in the same.
Yeah, this is pretty clear because I think what's going on there. Well, you have like three independent layers, strings, and then the question, and then the answers. What he calls the answers, right?
Yeah.
So, and this is quite clear from listening because you have like timbral differences between the layers. So you have like the sound of strings, the sound of trumpet, and the sound of flutes. And this makes a coherence that is not reducible to temporal contiguity. So this is what we were aiming at, right? You have like a coherence that does not depend upon temporal contiguity, like the thing being immediately successive, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's almost like, so you have this kind of strings in G or whatever here, and you have the trumpet and the flutes. And actually this thing here scans time,
Time.
more, sorry?
Yeah, it's scanning the time from above, like something. It's not within the succession. The
Yeah,
strings
of
are
course.
successive. They have a counterpoint, like a linear counterpoint. The other thing is like scanning time from beyond, in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. So you see, like that structure we were talking about, where you have shots like this, and what we need is to guarantee that there is some if there is compatibility here, we can have something that, let's say, refers, right, or is kind of conjoins this as a sequence, right? This was
No, this is clear enough. Like
yes.
in music, the perfect example would be simply to have like a final tonic chord, So you have like several chords, and then you have the final tonic. So the tonic affirms the tonality. Everything else is defined by the final epsilon because it's the tonic chord. It defines the tonality. So it envelopes the shit out of everything else, in a sense, in tonal music, right?
Yeah. But what I think it's nice is that this thing here, so it clarifies that this kind of basic ordering, which actually will allow you to derive some notion of order for the sequence, might be temporal order, we don't know, spatial ordering. So for example, we can, if the first shot was like a close-up, where, for example, some object on top of a table was important, and the second shot, the same object was localized from further away, and the third, this was localized like from much further away, like okay, like small like this. You do get a sense of ordering because these things are compatible, but the sense of ordering will be spatial. Whereas if I got a shot where this thing was central, and then I got another shot where these things were kind of to the side, and then finally it was no longer there, these things are still compatible,
yeah,
and the order has a different temporal meaning. So if it's temporal or spatial, it's actually derived from the logic. It's not guaranteed by anything before. And it can be this, and this is the first point concerning how this is, let's say, reaching up to talk about shots. Now, when you get to what I like about the example of, yeah, I need to go soon too. What I like about the musical example is that, for example, you have this sort of kind of amorphous, not very structured strings there, and you can try to, like, you don't know what exactly counts as a measure of its kind of cycle until you get something like the trumpet here, which makes that part into kind of some sort of temporal unit, right? So you again, you can use the idea of not sequence because that wouldn't apply to music in the same way, but some level of some immanent notion of duration that concerns again an envelope in a different way, right? So what I think our issue is, and that Dennis was mentioning, I know he needs to go, but is that, okay, this is all regional. The question is, what else do you need to make sure that this gives you, let's say, that these things will give you a global view of a movie, like the vibe of a movie or the world of a movie, or, for example, the world of that particular music, right? Like you need some extra thing. And that's where I think, like, we can talk about all of this without talking about the transcendental functor. I think the transcendental functor is about generalizing this while keeping the information. Because compatibility and envelope already appeared here, and this is the region, what he calls the real synthesis part of the chapter. The transcendental functor is asking under which conditions this compatibility and this enveloping, which are already, let's say, on the world, they're not on the transcendental. They're not between degrees, they're between sections of multiples. This is a section of the actual sound. And these are actual images, right? The question is, under which conditions can we generalize this from, let's say, a particular part of a Bach canon to, let's say, the world of that canon, right? Or a particular sequence in a movie to the world of that movie that not only includes all the sequences in the movie, but might include, for example, a sequel, which needs to respect some information from the differential world of a Marvel movie, for example, right? Or, for example, another variation that needs to respect some basic informational structure of that song cycle or whatever. So how do we manage from the analysis of these regions to move to the global analysis? I think that's what the functor is trying to guarantee, right? So I have the impression that that's part of the reason why he doesn't really worry about the analytic part of it that much, which I agree is a bit weird, but given the detail that he's going through.
Yeah, we probably have to work through that. There may be something that I'm missing in the construction. I'll take a look at it. But another thing that sounds a little bit strange to me is that the most important, the apex of all the presentation is in the scholium. I mean,
I think we should take it seriously that it is a scholium.
yeah, that is what I'm wondering about, because
Maybe he will not introduce such novel things in the scholium. He'll just wrap it up in a sense. This is why I thought coherence was already defined. I thought every relevant thing was already defined, and so you can have this extra thing. So you can have like a overall definition of the ontology.
But he is introducing something new. He's introducing functor within that scholium.
Yeah.
The global analysis that that Gabriel is referring to is all in the scholium.
This is super relevant to my project, Gabriel, to everybody here, but I'm not sure the functor. Even if there is a new machinery, the sense of this introduction might be just to give an overall synthesis of a world, not so much to present a building block of a world.
Yeah, I have the impression that the building blocks are guaranteed by the construction of real atoms.
Yeah, I think the building blocks were already there. This is why it is a scholium. Like you can have a basic understanding of the coherence of a world without the scholium, and the transcendental is there to give you the final, overall definition that will encompass the whole thing. And for that, he needed the functor. But I'm not sure if the introduction of a new formal machinery means a relevant introduction of a super relevant conceptual new thing. Not sure about that.
Yeah, because the reason why is that I tend to agree with you is that this thing here and this thing here were related in what he called the fundamental theorem of atomic logic. The only thing that was not related yet is that if you have this and this at a regional level, meaning if you have sequences in a movie that are both compatible and can be enveloped as sequences, right? And this, I was talking about this to a friend, I think he left, he was here previously, Hermano, who studies movies that have no parts. Like there's a whole series of movies, American experimental movies, where the idea is that you continue a shot for so long that, for example, everything that happened in that shot no longer counts as a part of it. Like you saw a man do some action, but at some point you see the shot for so long that the action no longer is atomic. Like it's not the relevant section of the movie. The duration itself is the section. Right?
Yeah, we call this vertical time.
Yeah, so like this is perfectly fitting with this, right? It's just the case where the compatibility.
Singular events are not counted as one anymore.
Yeah, singular. Yeah,
and it's kind of interesting example because it needs time. I mean, in the real world of film and music, it needs time to adjust your perception to that. Because when you enter a new movie, when you enter into a music, you tend to count as one the events of obviously the events of the music, the events of the music. But it's only through this suspension of action that you get accustomed to a certain vibe, something that so what I thought it was important, it's not important actually.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, you're seeing this shot in T0, nothing is happening. In T1, a cat enters the picture. In T2, you see a house, and you say, okay, the relation between the cat and the house is what gives the compatibility in the shot, defines the atoms. But then you have T3 without anything, or with some other stuff, T4, Tn, and suddenly it's to relate this back to this, you find nothing but the fact of the duration to guarantee the consistency. Then
and this has, you have also the Deleuzian concept for that, the image time, right? The time image.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to get at. Like, we can derive all these classic tropes of more experimental approach to duration, to like as a single theoretical framework where you just define how the envelope relates to the compatibility, and you get that different spaces, right? You can get like a classical movie space where drama and figures count as atoms. You can get experimental space where atoms are colors, sensibility, shapes, or whatever. You can get like truly experimental stuff where the only thing guaranteeing the coherence is the very duration of the shot. Like one movie that I wanted to show you guys today is by Michael Snow called Wavelength, where it's a zooming shot where everything happens like for 40 minutes, but like everything passes and the zoom continues, kind of focusing on one point on the wall. And you can, at that point, you realize that everything else wasn't really guaranteeing the coherence. It's the zoom that is guaranteeing it, right? So my point is that all of this concerns the regional logic and what he calls the fundamental theorem. The only thing that this whole machinery is worried about, in my opinion, is can I guarantee the general form under which, working from the fundamental theorem, I can get the global view, right? So fundamental theorem will, for example, guarantee for me the intelligibility of sequences in a world. The transcendental functor will guarantee that one sequence has some relation to another, that has some relation to another, that preserves this logic, right? So the only things that I think that it's trying to do analytically is ask, under what conditions can these things be glued, right? And no, analytically, under what conditions will an information be, the transcendental information, be preserved? And synthetically, under what conditions can they be glued together? So this and this is what this arrow here is all about. Under what conditions will the category of these things and the category of these compatibilities here guaranteed? Under order, right? So I kind of agree with Caron, though I totally agree that the scholium is kind of a patchwork of formal and kind of poetic stuff that is filling some holes, and there is some circularity. But I kind of think that all the heavy machinery is here and in the fundamental theorem. Which says that if you have an objective region of the support set,
I think maybe the most productive way of solving this conundrum is just to consult the notion of pre-sheave and sheave in the textbooks, because I think this is what this is about, right?
Yeah, this is, in my opinion, this is what it's about. The question of I think another way of putting it is, are real syntheses still in a pre-sheave structure where the sheaving is not guaranteed, or is the information for the sheave structure already in the real synthesis, and the functor is just telling you how these things that are already there are glued together, right?
Yeah, that is a good question. And maybe just look into other literature about this, because maybe Badiou is not being super precise in this.
Yeah, I know he talks about functors a bit before, but I don't know where it is. Uh, uh,
You just mentioned functors one time before, and that was just a passing comment,
where?
from what I remember. I don't remember where.
Yeah, I wanted to find it because, well, anyway, we can talk about it later. I don't want to keep you guys any longer, but
Yeah, it was very long session anyway. So, but
It was great. Thank you very much.
my pleasure, guys. Hope this wasn't totally confusing.
No, it was
Great.
absolutely brilliant. So
doubt.
we meet next next Tuesday, and well, we can chat on the chat window about the logistics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great, guys.
Take care, man. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.